I walked into my 30th birthday party and realized it was a trial. 74 faces judged me like a jury, while the 75th waited in the shadows. When my father held up the DNA results and announced I was not their daughter, my mother snatched my car keys and my sister started live streaming. Then, a man stepped out from the crowd, a man my family swore had died 30 years ago. My name is Tiffany Reyes, and exactly 4 minutes ago, I walked through the double mahogany doors of the Wrenwood Terrace believing I was walking into a celebration of my life. I was wrong. I did not walk into a birthday party. I walked into an execution. The invitation had said 7 o'clock sharp. It was exactly 7 o'clock. I had checked my watch 3 times in the elevator, my heart doing that stupid, hopeful flutter against my ribs. 30 years old, the big 30. For the first time in my life, my parents, Wade and Celeste Mercer, had organized something grand. Not a backyard barbecue where I was expected to man the grill while my sister, Tessa, opened gifts meant for herself. Not a forgotten dinner at a diner. A private room at the most exclusive venue in the city. I had worn a dark blue dress I could barely afford, spent 40 minutes on my hair, and told myself that maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. Maybe 30 was the magic number where I stopped being the obligation and started being the daughter. I pushed the doors open, a practiced smile plastered on my face, ready to feign surprise. I had rehearsed the gasp. I had rehearsed the hand over the heart, but the room was silent. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that sucks the oxygen right out of your lungs. There were no balloons. There was no cake. There was no banner reading Happy Birthday, Tiffany. The lighting was harsh, clinical, almost like the overhead fluorescence in the trauma ward where I worked, not the warm amber glow of a high-end restaurant. And then there were the eyes. 75 people were seated in perfect rows, facing the door, facing me, my aunts, my uncles, cousins I had babysat, neighbors I had shoveled snow for. 75 pairs of eyes, but not one of them held warmth. They looked like a jury that had already reached a verdict and were just waiting for the judge to read the sentence. They sat with their hands folded in their laps, stiff, terrified, or perhaps just complicit, at the very front of the room, standing behind a table draped in white linen. Was my father, Wade Mercer. He held a microphone in one hand, his knuckles white. Beside him stood my mother, Celeste, her face a mask of icy resolve, and to their right, my younger sister, Tessa. There was nothing on the table except a single, thick red envelope. "Tiffany," Wade said. His voice boomed through the speakers, distorted slightly by feedback. It wasn't a greeting, it was a summons. He didn't say happy birthday. He didn't say welcome. He pointed a finger at a lone, wooden chair positioned in the center of the open floor, facing the 75 relatives. It looked less like a seat of honor and more like the chair they strap you into before they flip the switch. "Sit down," Wade commanded. My legs felt numb, detached from my body. I should have turned around. I should have run back to the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. But the shock anchored me. I walked forward, the sound of my heels clicking against the polished floor echoing like gunshots in the quiet room. I sat. I felt small. I felt 12 years old again, being scolded for getting a B+ on a report card, while Tessa got ice cream for failing. Wade didn't wait for me to get comfortable. He picked up the red envelope. He tore it open with a violence that made me flinch. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, unfolded it, and held it up for the room to see. "For 30 years, Wade began, his voice trembling not with sorrow, but with a theatrical rage. "We have harbored a lie. We have fed it, clothed it, and sheltered it. But the truth acts like a rot. And today, we cut it out." He looked directly at me. "This is a DNA test, conducted last week from the hair sample we took from your brush. The results are conclusive. You are not our daughter." The words hung in the air. I blinked. I tried to process the syntax, the meaning, not our daughter. "You are not a Mercer," he continued, his volume rising. You share 0 genetic markers with me, 0 with Celeste. We took you in. We raised you. But you are nothing to us. You are a stranger. A collective gasp went through the room, but it sounded staged, rehearsed, like a studio audience reacting to a cue card. I looked at Aunt Marlene in the second row. She looked away, clutching her purse tight. I looked at my cousin David. He stared straight ahead. Before I could form a word, before I could ask why or how, Celeste moved. My mother, no, the woman who raised me, stepped out from behind the table. She walked toward me with purpose. I instinctively flinched, expecting a slap, but she didn't strike me. She reached out and grabbed my purse from my lap. "Hey," I gasped, my voice sounding thin and weak. She rifled through it, ignoring my privacy, ignoring my dignity. Her hand emerged, clutching my car keys. The keys to the Honda Civic I had been driving for 5 years. "This does not belong to you," Celeste spat, dropping my purse back onto the floor. She held the keys up like a trophy. "This car was bought with Mercer money. The insurance is under the Mercer name. You have a job at the hospital? You think you got that on your merit? You got it because of the reputation this family built in this town. You are a fraud. Tiffany, everything you have is ours." "Mom, please," I whispered. "Everyone is watching. Let them watch." Tessa shrieked. I snapped my head toward my sister. Tessa was holding her phone up, the bright light of the flash blinding me. She wasn't just recording. I saw the interface, the scrolling comments, the hearts popping up on the side of the screen. She was live streaming. "Are you guys seeing this?" Tessa said to the phone, her voice pitching up into that fake influencer cadence she used for her makeup tutorials. "This is the moment, the reveal, 30 years of freeloading, exposed live. Look at her face. She knows. She totally knows she scammed us." She shoved the phone closer to me. "Say hi to the stream. Tiffany, tell 50,000 people how it feels to steal a life that isn't yours." My stomach turned over. This wasn't just a rejection. This was a production. They had staged this. They had invited everyone we knew, set up the chairs, prepared the props. They wanted to destroy me, not just privately, but globally. "Why?" I managed to choke out. "Why are you doing this?" Wade stepped forward again. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out another document. This one was longer, legal-sized, stapled at the top. He slid it across the table toward me. It skidded to a halt near my feet. "You want to know why?" Wade sneered. "Because nothing in this world is free, Tiffany. You lived in our house. You ate our food. You used our electricity. We calculated it. All of it." He pointed at the document on the floor. "That is a promissory note. It details the cost of raising you from the age of infancy to the age of 18, plus interest, and the rent for the years you stayed after college. It comes to $312,450.62. My jaw dropped. You want me to pay you for raising me?" "It is a debt," Wade declared, "and I have a lawyer standing by. If you do not sign that acknowledgement of debt tonight, right here, in front of these witnesses, we will file a lawsuit for fraud and theft of services first thing tomorrow morning. We will garnish your wages. We will take your license. We will bury you." I looked down at the paper. The numbers blurred. $300,000. I didn't have $3,000, let alone $300,000. I was a nurse. I worked 12-hour shifts. I saved every penny. "This is insane," I said, my voice gaining a fraction of strength. "You can't charge a child for growing up." "You weren't our child," Celeste screamed, her composure cracking. "That is the point. You were an investment that failed. You were a parasite." I stood up. My knees shook, but I stood. I looked around the room again. 75 people. People I had spent Christmases with. People I had laughed with. I looked at Uncle Jerry, who taught me how to fish. I looked at my cousin Sarah, who I had helped plan her wedding. "Does anyone else think this is crazy?" I asked, my voice ringing out in the silence. "Aunt Marlene? Jerry? Anyone?" Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. Uncle Jerry looked at his shoes. Marlene dabbed a handkerchief to dry eyes. They knew. They all knew. They had been briefed. They had been told to sit there and be the jury. They were afraid of Wade. They were afraid of his money, his influence, his rage. Or maybe they just didn't care. Maybe I really was just the outsider they had tolerated for 3 decades. And now that the permission slip to hate me was signed, they were relieved. The realization hit me harder than the DNA test. I wasn't losing a family. I never had one. I was alone, completely, utterly alone in a room full of people. Wade was smiling now, a cold, victorious smile. Sit down and sign, Tiffany. Or walk out that door with nothing but the clothes on your back and a lawsuit waiting in your mailbox. Tessa laughed, panning the camera back to her face. She's crying. Guys, look at the tears. Crocodile tears. I couldn't breathe. The walls of the Wrenwood Terrace felt like they were closing in. I turned toward the exit, but the distance to the doors seemed to have stretched into miles. I was trapped. I was going to pass out. Then, I saw movement. In the far back corner of the room, near the emergency exit, there was a shadow. I hadn't noticed him before because the spotlight was so focused on my humiliation. But someone was standing there. He wasn't sitting in the jury rows. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He wore a charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly, distinct from the ill-fitting rental tuxedos some of my uncles wore. He was tall, with silver hair that caught the dim light, but it was his face that stopped me. Everyone else in the room looked at me with contempt, pity, or indifference. This man looked at me with pain. It was a raw, visceral agony, as if watching me stand there was physically hurting him. He wasn't looking at the spectacle. He was looking at me, into my eyes. Wade followed my gaze. I saw my father's, my adoptive father's, face go pale. The smug smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine terror. "Who are you?" Wade barked, though his voice lacked its earlier thunder. "This is a private event. Security." The man in the gray suit didn't flinch. He pushed himself off the wall. He didn't look at Wade. He didn't look at the camera. He kept his eyes locked on mine. He took a step forward, then another. The rhythmic tap of his dress shoes on the floor broke the silence of the room. He walked with a heavy, dangerous grace. "Wade," the man said. His voice was low, gravelly, but it carried to every corner of the room without a microphone. "I suggest you put that paper away." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew that voice. I didn't know how, and I didn't know from where. But the vibration of it felt like a memory I had buried deep in my marrow. "You're dead," Celeste whispered, the color draining from her face. She dropped my car keys. They hit the floor with a jingle that sounded like a scream. We got the certificate. You're dead." The man stopped 10 feet away from me. He ignored her. He looked at me, and for the first time since I walked into this room, I felt seen, not as a defendant, not as a debt, but as a person. "I'm not dead, Celeste," the man said, and he finally turned his gaze to the head table. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "But if you say one more word to my daughter, you might wish you were—" He turned back to me, extending a hand. "Hello, Tiffany," he said softly. "It's been a long time." 4 weeks before the world collapsed under the weight of a DNA test and a promissory note, I was standing in the fluorescent purgatory of the Seabrook Critical Care Center. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. The air smelled of floor wax and antiseptic, a scent that had embedded itself into my pores over the last 7 years. I was adjusting the flow rate on a saline drip for Mrs. Gable in room 304 when my phone vibrated against my hip. It was my sister, Tessa. My stomach did a small, traitorous flip. Tessa never called at 2 in the morning unless there was a crisis. Usually, the crisis involved a declined credit card at a club, a flat tire on the car I paid the insurance for, or a sudden, dramatic breakup with a boyfriend I had never met. I stepped out into the hallway, checking to make sure the charge nurse was not watching, and answered, Tessa did not sound like she was in a crisis. She sounded like she had inhaled a canister of helium. "Tiffany, you are not going to believe this," she squealed, her voice piercing through the receiver and echoing in the quiet hospital corridor. I leaned against the wall, rubbing the bridge of my nose. I asked her what was wrong and if she was okay. "Nothing is wrong," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "In fact, everything is perfect. Mom and Dad are planning something huge. I am not supposed to tell you, obviously, because it is a surprise. But you know I cannot keep a secret to save my life." I waited. My parents did not plan things. My parents attended things other people planned, or they delegated planning to me. "They are throwing you a birthday party," Tessa announced. "A real one, for your 30th. I froze. A nurse pushed a medication cart past me, the wheels squeaking rhythmically, but the sound seemed to come from underwater. I asked her to repeat that. "A party. Tiff," she said, dragging out the vowels. "A big one. They invited, everybody. All the aunts and uncles, the cousins, even some of Dad's business partners. It is going to be at the Wrenwood Terrace. Do you know how hard it is to get a reservation there?" I did know. Wrenwood Terrace was the kind of place where a salad cost $25 and the waiters wore white gloves. It was the kind of place Wade and Celeste went to for their anniversary, leaving us at home with a frozen pizza. It was definitely not the kind of place where they took Tiffany. I felt a sudden, sharp suspicion. I asked her why they would do that. Tessa let out a huff of exasperation. "Because you are turning 30. Silly. It is a milestone. Mom said 30 is when a woman truly becomes herself. They want to celebrate you. Finally. Finally." The word hung there, heavy and loaded. I closed my eyes and let the memory of my 16th birthday wash over me. I had come home from school expecting, if not a car, at least a dinner. Instead, I found a note on the fridge saying they had gone to Tessa's dance recital, and there was leftover lasagna in the foil. For my 21st. I bought my own cupcake from a grocery store and ate it in the library while studying for finals. My birthdays were usually marked by a text message from Wade saying happy birthday and a request to pick up dry cleaning on my way over. But 30, maybe 30 was different, Tessa continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Listen, you have to act surprised, okay? When you walk in, you have to do the whole hands-over-the-mouth gasp thing. Mom is really stressing about the details. She wants it to be perfect. She rented the private executive room. It cost them, $5,000 just for the deposit." My eyes snapped open. $5,000. That number did not make sense. Wade complained if the electric bill went up by $10. He monitored the thermostat like a hawk. He once made me return a pair of scrubs because he found a cheaper brand online. Spending $5,000 on a room for me felt wrong. It felt like wearing a sweater that was 2 sizes too small. I asked her if she was sure. I asked her if maybe she heard them wrong. "I am looking at the invoice right now," Tessa said, and I heard the rustle of paper. It says Wrenwood Terrace, April 23rd, 7 o'clock. Guest count is 75. "Oh, and Tiff? Wear something nice. Not your usual clearance rack stuff. Mom wants family photos." She hung up before I could ask anything else, leaving me standing in the sterile hallway with a dial tone buzzing in my ear. I should have felt happy. I should have felt relieved. But instead, I felt a strange, cold prickle at the base of my neck. It was the same feeling I got when a patient's vitals looked stable, but their skin felt clammy. Something was crashing, even if the monitors hadn't picked it up yet. I went back to work, but my mind was elsewhere. I spent the rest of the night shift acting out the scenario in my head. Maybe they were changing. People changed, didn't they? Maybe they realized that I was the one who was always there. I was the one who drove them to appointments. I was the one who fixed the Wi-Fi. I was the one who sent money every month to help with the household expenses while Tessa lived there rent-free and bought designer handbags. Maybe this party was their way of apologizing without having to say the words. I wanted to believe it, God. I wanted to believe it so badly. I wanted to believe that I had finally earned my place at the table. When my shift ended at 7 in the morning, I sat in my car in the parking garage and scrolled through my contacts. I needed verification. I needed to know this wasn't some cruel joke or a misunderstanding. I texted Aunt Marlene. She was Celeste's sister, a nervous woman who usually couldn't hold water, let alone a secret. "Hey, Aunt Marlene, just checking in. Are we seeing each other on the 23rd? I watched the three little dots bounce on the screen for a long time. Aunt Marlene was a fast typer. This hesitation was unusual. Finally, the reply came. "Yes, we will be there. Your father insisted." There was no exclamation point, no birthday cake emoji. "Can't wait to celebrate you." Just a flat, factual confirmation. Your father insisted. I frowned. I texted my cousin David next. We used to be close when we were kids, before he got a job in finance and started mimicking Wade's mannerisms. "Hey, David, heard about the big dinner. You coming?" His reply was almost instant. "Yeah, Mom said we have to go. See you there. Have to go. Not wanna go." I lowered the phone. The morning sun was cutting through the windshield, blindingly bright, but I felt cold. They sounded like they were being summoned to a funeral, not a birthday party, or maybe a court hearing, but I pushed the thought away. I was an expert at pushing thoughts away. You don't survive 30 years in the Mercer household without a black belt in denial. I told myself they were just busy. I told myself they were trying to keep the surprise intact and didn't want to give anything away. I drove home to my small apartment, the one I paid for with double shifts and skipped vacations. I took a shower, washing the hospital smell off my skin, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. There were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. "They are spending $5,000 on you." I told my reflection. "They are inviting everyone. This is it. Tiffany, this is the moment." I decided right then that I would be the perfect daughter. I would be grateful. I would show them that I deserved this effort. 2 days later, I went to their house. I told myself I was going to drop off a box of specialized vitamins Celeste had mentioned wanting, but really, I was going looking for clues. I wanted to see the warmth in their eyes. I wanted to catch them whispering about balloons or cake flavors. I let myself in with my key. The house was quiet. The foyer was spotless, the air smelling of lemon polish and old money. I walked toward the kitchen, but stopped when I heard Wade's voice coming from his study. The door was cracked open a few inches. Wade was on the phone. His voice was low, but Wade had a way of projecting even when he whispered. It was the voice of a man who was used to giving orders. "The 23rd is the hard deadline," Wade was saying. "No, we cannot push it back. The notification came last month. We have to execute the document on the day she turns 30. Exactly on the day." I stood frozen in the hallway, the box of vitamins clutching in my hands. Execute the document? What document? There was a pause as he listened to the person on the other line. "I don't care about the optics," Wade snapped. "I care about the liability. If she doesn't sign that waiver and the acknowledgement of debt before midnight, we are exposed. I have the witnesses lined up. I have the notary coming. It will be done publicly. She won't have a choice." My heart hammered against my ribs. Debt? Liability? Publicly? Was he talking about a business deal? Wade was always involved in some complicated real estate transaction or investment scheme. Maybe he was selling a property on my birthday. That would be just like him, to combine a party with a business meeting to write off the expense. "Yes," Wade said, his voice dropping to a growl. "We have kept this lid on for 3 decades. I am not losing it all now because of a technicality in the trust. Just make sure the papers are ready." He hung up. I should have run. I should have walked into that room and demanded to know what he was talking about. Trust? 3 decades? The words floated in my brain, disjointed and alarming. But then Wade turned and saw me through the crack in the door. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look like a man caught plotting. He looked annoyed. He walked to the door and pulled it open, his frame filling the doorway. "Tiffany," he said, smoothing his tie. "How long have you been standing there?" "Just got here," I lied. My voice was steady. It was the nurse voice, the voice I used when a patient was crashing, and I needed the family to stay calm. I brought Mom's vitamins. Wade stared at me for a long second. His eyes were hard, calculating. He was assessing how much I had heard. Then, the mask slipped back into place. Not a warm mask, but a polite one. "Right," he said. "Put them in the kitchen. We're busy today. Don't linger." He closed the door in my face. I walked to the kitchen, my legs feeling like lead. I put the vitamins on the counter. I should have left then and never come back. I should have canceled the party. But the human heart is a stupid, stubborn thing. I rationalized it. He must have been talking about a client. I thought as I drove away. He has a client named Tiffany. It's a common name. Or maybe he meant the trust for the house. Maybe they are putting the house in a trust for me and Tessa. That's why he needs me to sign papers. It was a leap of logic so wide I could have built a bridge across it. But I crossed it anyway. I crossed it because the alternative, that my father was planning a legal ambush on my birthday, was too painful to look at directly. So, I doubled down. If they were giving me a party, I would give them a gift that showed I understood the value of family. I spent the next 3 weeks curating a photo album. I dug through boxes of old Polaroids. I scanned digital files. It was harder than I expected. I was looking for photos of us happy. I found hundreds of photos of Tessa smiling, holding trophies, sitting on Wade's shoulders, blowing out candles. But in the photos where I appeared, I was usually in the background. I was the blur at the edge of the frame holding the coats. I was the one taking the picture. I found one photo from a trip to the beach when I was 10. I was building a sandcastle, and Celeste was standing near me, looking at the ocean. She wasn't looking at me, but we were in the same frame. We looked like a mother and daughter. I cropped the photo to make us look closer than we were. I bought an expensive leather-bound album. I glued the photos in with archival tape. I wrote captions in my best calligraphy. Family first. Grateful. Love. I was building a monument to a history that didn't exist, hoping that if I made it beautiful enough, it would become true. The days ticked by. Every time I looked at the calendar, the date, April 23rd, seemed to pulse with a red light. I bought the blue dress. I bought matching shoes. I booked a hair appointment. 2 days before the party, I received an email from the hospital administration. It was a confirmation for an interview for the head nurse position I had applied for. The interview was scheduled for the morning after my birthday. I took it as a sign. The universe was aligning. I was going to have a family celebration, and then I was going to get a promotion. My life was finally starting. On the night of the party, I stood in front of my full-length mirror. I smoothed the fabric of the dress over my hips. I looked at the woman in the reflection. She looked hopeful. She looked naive. "Happy birthday, Tiffany," I whispered to the empty room. I grabbed the leather album, my offering of peace, and walked out the door. I drove to Wrenwood Terrace with a song playing on the radio. Tapping my fingers on the steering wheel, counting down the minutes until I would walk into a room full of people who loved me. I didn't know I was driving a hearse. I didn't know that the only thing waiting for me in that private room was a bill for my existence and a man who had come back from the dead to save me from the people I was trying so hard to please. The biology of a family is not defined by blood, or so I had told myself for 20 years. It is defined by function. In the ecosystem of the Mercer household, we had distinct roles, evolved and specialized like Darwin's finches. Tessa was the ornament. I was the utility. For the last 7 years. My life has been measured in 12-hour shifts at the Seabrook Critical Care Center. I live my life to the rhythm of pulse oximeters and the hiss of ventilators. I have held the hands of strangers as they took their last breaths because their families could not make it in time. I have cleaned fluids that would make most people gag. I have stood on my feet until the arches of my shoes collapsed and my veins throbbed against my skin. And every 2 weeks, when the direct deposit hit my account, I performed my secondary function. I transferred money to my parents. It started when I was 23. I had just gotten my nursing license. Wade sat me down in the living room, the leather of his armchair creaking as he leaned forward. He told me that business was tight. He told me that the market was volatile. He told me that family supports family. So, I wrote a check for $500 to help with groceries. The next month, It was $600 for the electric bill. Then it became a flat rate, $750, sent on the first of every month. Like a subscription fee for being their daughter. I did the math once, late at night when I couldn't sleep. 7 years, 84 months, at an average of $750 a month. I had transferred $63,000 to Wade and Celeste Mercer. $63,000. That is a down payment on a house. That is a master's degree. That is a luxury car. To me, it was the price of admission. While I was scrubbing betadine off my hands at 3 a.m, my sister Tessa was sleeping in the bedroom down the hall from my parents, the same room she had occupied since she was 5. Tessa did not pay rent. Tessa did not pay for groceries. Tessa was, in her own words, finding herself. Finding herself seemed to be an expensive process. It involved a lot of trips to Tulum and endless boxes of clothes arriving from online boutiques. She cycled through passions the way I cycled through patience. First, she was going to be a jewelry designer. Wade bought her a $2,000 kiln that sat unopened in the garage. Then, she was going to be a life coach. Celeste paid for a certification course that Tessa quit after 3 weeks because the instructor had bad vibes. Currently, Tessa was a content creator. This meant she spent her days filming herself making smoothies in our parents' granite countertop kitchen and complaining about burnout. I remember a specific Tuesday last year. My car, a beat-up Honda that sounded like a lawnmower, had broken down on the highway after a night shift. The alternator was shot. The mechanic quoted me $450. I didn't have it. I had just sent my monthly tribute to Wade, and my student loan payment had drained the rest. I called home. "Dad," I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "I am stuck at the mechanic. It is the alternator. Can you float me $500 until my next paycheck? I will pay you back with interest." There was a silence on the line. Then Wade sighed, the sound of a man deeply disappointed by the world. "Tiffany," he said, "we have talked about this. You are an adult. If you cannot manage your liquidity, you need to look at your spending habits. Handouts cripple the spirit. You need to figure this out. It builds character." I walked 3 miles home in the rain that day. I ate instant noodles for 2 weeks to pay the mechanic. 3 days after that lecture on character and liquidity, I stopped by the house to drop off some mail. Tessa was in the driveway, squealing over a delivery. It was a massive ring light and a professional-grade camera setup. "What is that?" I asked. "Oh, Daddy got it for me," Tessa beamed. "It is for my channel." The lighting in my room was tragedy. Absolute tragedy. This was only $1,200. Can you believe it? Such a steal. I stood there, my wet shoes from the walk still damp, staring at the $1,200 investment in Tessa's vanity while I couldn't afford to fix the machine that took me to work. That was the dynamic. I was the investment that was expected to yield a return. Tessa was the artwork that existed to be admired. It went back to when we were children. If I brought home an A-, Wade would look at the report card and nod. "Standard." His face said, "You did what you are supposed to do." If I cleaned the entire house, Celeste would point out a spot I missed on the baseboard. My excellence was the baseline. My failures were catastrophes. But if Tessa managed to tie her shoes correctly, it was a parade. If she drew a picture of a horse that looked like a potato with legs, Celeste would frame it and hang it in the foyer. Look at her creativity. They would coo. She has such a unique spirit. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself that they were harder on me because they thought I was stronger. They pushed me because they knew I could take it. I told myself that Tessa needed the coddling because she was fragile. I was the oak. She was the orchid. But oaks need water too. There was a social element to it as well. A subtle segregation that I only noticed in hindsight. Wade loved to talk about family honor. He loved to talk about his legacy in the community. He was a member of the Rotary Club, the Chamber of Commerce, the Golf Association. He loved galas. I was never invited. When they went to the mayor's Christmas ball, Tessa went with them, wearing a gown that cost more than my first car. She needs to network. Celeste would say, She needs to meet a nice boy from a good family. And me? Someone needs to watch the house, Wade would say. Or, you have work in the morning, don't you? We wouldn't want you to be tired. I was the secret kept in the basement, not literally, but socially. I was the daughter who existed to facilitate their lives, not to share in them. I was the one called when the toilet backed up, not when the champagne was popped. Despite all of this, despite the math that clearly showed I was in the red, I had a plan. I was saving. I was scraping together every dollar I didn't send them. I had a vision board taped to the inside of my closet door. It was a picture of a small condo downtown. Nothing fancy, just one bedroom, a balcony, and a door I could lock. I wanted a place where no one could tell me I owed them. I wanted a set of keys that no one could snatch away. I was $4,000 away from the down payment. But more than the condo, more than the financial freedom, I wanted the one thing I couldn't buy. I wanted them to be proud of me. It is a pathetic, hungry thing. The desire for parental approval, it defies logic. You can be 30 years old, a professional handling life and death situations, and yet, you turn into a 6-year-old when your mother looks at you with that flat, unimpressed stare. I wanted Wade to look at me the way he looked at his stock portfolio when the market was up. I wanted Celeste to touch my arm and say, "You did good, Tiffany." That hunger made me blind. It made me ignore the slips. There was a barbecue 2 years ago. It was the 4th of July. Uncle Jerry was grilling. Aunt Marlene had consumed 3 glasses of white Zinfandel and was feeling loose. I was in the kitchen making the potato salad because Celeste didn't want to ruin her manicure. Marlene wandered in, swaying slightly. She looked at me, her eyes glassy and unfocused. "You are a good girl, Tiffany," she slurred. "You really are. Better than they deserve." I smiled, uncomfortable. "Thanks, Aunt Marlene." She leaned in, her breath smelling of grapes. "It is funny, isn't it? How genetics works, or doesn't work. You are so sturdy, and Tessa is so wispy. You would never know you were the—" She stopped. Her eyes widened, as if her brain had just caught up with her mouth and slammed on the emergency brakes. "The what?" I asked, pausing with the spoon in the mayonnaise jar. Nothing," she stammered. "The older one? That is what I meant. You are the older one. So responsible." She turned and practically ran out of the kitchen. The taken child. That was the phrase that had floated in the air, unsaid but heard. I filed it away. I added it to the pile of anomalies, like my birth certificate. When I was 18 and applying for nursing school, I needed my birth certificate. I asked Celeste for it. She got strangely agitated. She told me it was lost in the flood we had in the basement back in '98. But we didn't live in a flood zone in '98. I had pointed out, "Don't argue with me. Tiffany," she had snapped, "it is gone. We have a certified copy somewhere. But Wade has it in the safe deposit box, and he is too busy to get it. Just use your passport." So I used my passport. I never saw the certificate. I never saw the piece of paper that proved I began where they said I began. I pushed the doubt down. I compacted it like trash in a compactor, making room for more hope. Because if I acknowledged the doubt, if I pulled that thread, the whole tapestry of my identity would unravel. And I was terrified of what was underneath. So, when the invitation for the 30th birthday party came, I didn't look at it as a trap. I didn't look at the expensive venue and the guest list as a setup. I looked at it as the finish line. I told myself, this is it. They are finally balancing the ledger. They are spending the money on me because they finally see the value. I sat in my car outside Wrenwood Terrace that night, gripping the steering wheel. I checked my makeup in the rearview mirror. I practiced my surprised face. I touched the leather cover of the photo album I had made for them, a curated history of a happiness we never really had. Tonight is different. I whispered to the empty car. Tonight, you become a daughter. I was so desperate to be loved that I walked willingly into the slaughterhouse. I checked my watch. 7 o'clock. Time to go in. I stepped out of the car, locked the door, and walked toward the building. leaving the safety of my solitude behind. Walking toward the people who were about to hand me a bill for my life. The trap did not snap shut all at once. It closed slowly, click by click, over the course of the week leading up to my birthday, if I had been paying attention to the noise instead of the music I wanted to hear. I might have noticed the gears turning. I might have seen the teeth. It began with a requirement for my career. The position for head nurse at Seabrook Critical Care Center was not just a job. It was a terrifying leap up the ladder. It meant administrative power. It meant a salary that would finally allow me to stop living paycheck to paycheck. It meant I could buy that condo on my vision board. The application process was rigorous. I had the clinical hours, I had the certifications, I had the spotless record. But the hospital administrator, a woman named Mrs. Higgins who wore reading glasses on a chain and terrified the residents, told me I was missing one thing. "We need a character reference." "Tiffany," she had said, tapping a manicured fingernail on my file. "Not from a doctor. We know you can insert a catheter. We need a letter from a community leader. Someone who can vouch for your integrity outside of these walls. This is a leadership role. We need to know who you are when the scrubs come off." I knew exactly who fit that description. Wade Mercer was the definition of a community leader. He was on the zoning board. He was a platinum donor to the local arts council. A letter from him, on his heavy cream-colored stationery with the embossed letterhead, would be a golden ticket. I dreaded asking him. In the past, whenever I asked for a favor, there was a lecture attached. If I asked for advice on my taxes, I got a lecture on fiscal irresponsibility. If I asked to store a box in their garage, I got a lecture on hoarding. I called him on a Tuesday afternoon. I kept my voice professional, stripping it of the daughterly neediness that usually annoyed him. "Dad," I said, "I am applying for a promotion, a big one. I need a letter of recommendation from a pillar of the community. Would you be willing to write one for me?" I braced myself for the refusal. I expected him to say that it would be a conflict of interest, or that I should stand on my own 2 feet. Instead, there was a pause, and then a sound I rarely heard from Wade Mercer. He chuckled. "A promotion?" Wade asked, his voice smooth, almost melodic. "That is excellent news. Tiffany. Head nurse? That sounds significant." "It is," I said, suspicious of his tone. "It would mean a lot to me." "Of course I will write it," he said. I nearly dropped the phone. He agreed, just like that. No lecture, no bargaining. "In fact," he continued, the warmth in his voice thickening like syrup, "I will do better than just mail it to you. I will present it to you. At the party, Saturday night, it will be part of the ceremony." The words stuck in my ear. Ceremony. We are inviting so many important people. Wade said, "It is the perfect time to publicly acknowledge your achievements. I will hand it to you myself. Thank you, Dad," I stammered, feeling a wave of confusing gratitude. That is amazing." I hung up the phone feeling lightheaded. He was going to publicly endorse me. He was going to stand up in front of 75 people and hand me the key to my future. It felt like the universe was finally correcting its orbit. But that night, the doubt crept back in. It was a nagging, itching sensation, like a tag on the back of a shirt. Why is he being so nice? The doubt led me to my laptop. I sat at my small kitchen table at 1 a.m, the blue light of the screen illuminating my coffee mug. My mind drifted back to the conversation with Aunt Marlene about the taken child, and the argument with Celeste about my birth certificate. Lost in the flood. Celeste had said, the basement flooded in '98. I opened a search engine. I typed in Charleston County Historical Weather Data, 1998. I scrolled through the months. I looked for hurricanes. I looked for tropical storms. I looked for record-breaking rainfall. There was nothing. The year 1998 was remarkably dry. There was a drought in July. A mild storm in September that dropped 2 inches of rain, hardly enough to flood a basement in a house that sat on a hill. The Mercer house was on high ground. Our basement had a sump pump. I stared at the screen. There was no flood. If there was no flood, then the birth certificate was not destroyed by nature. It was destroyed, or hidden, by choice. Why lie about the weather? Why invent a disaster to explain a missing piece of paper? The next day, I went to their house to drop off the deposit check for the caterer. Wade had asked me to run the errand for him. Promising to reimburse me later, I found Celeste in the garden, pruning her prize-winning roses. She was wearing gardening gloves that looked like they had never touched dirt. "Mom," I said, trying to sound casual. She didn't look up. She snipped a dead head off a yellow rose with a sharp snick. "What is it? Tiffany?" "I was looking at old weather reports last night," I said, "for a project at work. Did you know it hardly rained at all in '98? Celeste froze. The shears hovered over a stem. "I am just confused," I continued, my heart beating faster. "You said my birth certificate was ruined in the flood that year, but I can't find any record of a flood." Celeste turned slowly. Her face was a mask of cold irritation. She pointed the shears at me, not threateningly, but accusingly. "Why are you always digging?" she asked. Her voice was low, dangerous. "I am not digging," I said. "I just want my papers. I am 30 years old. It doesn't matter what the weather report says." Celeste snapped. "A pipe burst. That is what happened. A pipe burst in the wall and flooded the file cabinet. Are you calling me a liar?" "No," I said, taking a step back. "Drop it, Tiffany," she hissed. "We are throwing you a massive party. We are spending thousands of dollars to celebrate you, and you come here and interrogate me about plumbing from 20 years ago? You are so ungrateful. It is a sickness with you. You can never just be happy with what you are given." The guilt hit me instantly. Conditioned and automatic. She was right. They were doing this nice thing. And here I was, picking at scabs. "I am sorry," I said quietly. "I didn't mean to upset you." "Just go," she said, turning back to the roses. "And make sure you look presentable on Saturday. Don't embarrass us." I left. But the splinter remained in my mind. A pipe burst. First it was a flood. Now it was a pipe. The story changed, but the anger remained constant. I decided to bury the suspicion. I needed to focus on the party. I needed to be the daughter they wanted. If I looked the part, maybe I would feel the part. I went to a boutique downtown, a place I usually avoided because a single scarf cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I found a dress. It was dark blue silk. Elegant, understated, conservative. It cost $450. I stood in the fitting room, staring at the price tag. That was half my rent. That was the money I was saving for the condo down payment. "Wade is giving you the recommendation letter." I told myself, "You will get the head nurse job. The raise will cover this dress in 2 weeks. Invest in the image." I bought the dress. I bought matching heels. I bought a lipstick shade that the salesgirl said made me look commanding. 2 days before the party, I drove to the Mercer house again. I had left my phone charger there during the caterer errand. As I pulled up to the curb, I saw my sister, Tessa. She was standing in the driveway. She wasn't alone. She was holding her phone, mounted on a stabilizer gimbal, filming something. She was filming my car, my beat-up. 10-year-old Honda Civic was parked on the street where I had left it. Tessa was walking around it slowly, panning the camera over the dent in the bumper, the scratched paint on the door, the fading sticker on the rear window. She was talking to the camera, her voice low, narrating. I parked my car and walked up the driveway. "Hey," I called out, "what are you doing?" Tessa jumped. She quickly lowered the phone, hiding the screen against her chest. She flashed a bright, guilty smile. "Oh, hey, Tiff," she chirped. "Nothing. Just practicing some B-roll for a vlog. I like the aesthetic of your car. It is so vintage, so gritty. My car isn't vintage." "Tessa," I said, frowning. "It is just old." "Right, totally," she said. She slipped the phone into her back pocket. "Hey, speaking of cars, are you driving to the party on Saturday?" "Yes," I said. "Why?" "Well," she said, twirling a lock of hair around her finger, "my car is in the shop, again, and I promised my friends I would meet them downtown after the family dinner. Could I borrow your car? Just to get from the restaurant to the club? You can ride home with Mom and Dad." I looked at her. Tessa hated my car. She refused to ride in it because she said it smelled like rubbing alcohol and despair. "You want to drive my car?" I asked. "To a club?" "Please," she begged, clasping her hands. "It is just for a few hours. I will fill the tank. I promise." I hesitated. It was an inconvenience. I would have to coordinate a ride back to my apartment with Wade. And that would be awkward. But Tessa was smiling at me. She wasn't being mean. She was asking for a favor. "Okay," I said. "Sure, you can take it after the dinner." "You are the best," she squealed. She hugged me, a rare, stiff embrace that smelled of expensive perfume. As I walked into the house to get my charger, I heard Celeste talking in the living room. She was on the phone. Yes, 75 chairs. Celeste was saying, "We need maximum capacity. No, I don't care if it is crowded. I want witnesses. The more people who see it, the better. It needs to be airtight." I stopped in the hallway. Airtight? That was a legal term. You made a contract airtight. You made a case airtight. You didn't make a birthday party airtight. She paused, listening. "Don't worry about the noise," she said. "Once Wade starts speaking, no one will say a word. We have the documents prepped. It will be over in 10 minutes. Then we serve the appetizers." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Documents? Maybe she meant the menu? Or a speech? Or maybe Wade was announcing a new business venture and using my birthday as a launch pad. That wouldn't be unusual. He often hijacked events for his own ego. Celeste hung up and turned. Seeing me standing there, she didn't look startled this time. She looked smug. "Found your charger?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Mom, what documents were you talking about?" Celeste smiled. It was a thin, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The surprise. "Tiffany," she said, "stop ruining the surprise. You are so impatient. Just wait until Saturday. Everything will be made clear." She shooed me out of the house. I drove home, my mind racing. The pieces were there. The missing birth certificate. The sudden kindness from Wade. The weird interest Tessa had in my car. The airtight guest list. But I couldn't assemble them into a picture that made sense. Why would they go to all this trouble? If they hated me, why throw a party? If they wanted to hurt me, why invite the whole town? My phone pinged as I walked into my apartment. It was an email. Subject: Interview confirmation. Head nurse position. Dear Ms. Reyes, we are pleased to confirm your final interview for Monday morning at 1900 hours. Please bring your references. I stared at the screen. This was it. The timeline was perfect. Saturday night. Wade gives me the letter. Monday morning. I hand it to Mrs. Higgins. Monday afternoon. I get the job. The fear evaporated, burned away by the heat of ambition. I wasn't walking into a trap. I was walking into my destiny. I convinced myself that my family was simply eccentric, that their version of love was complicated and transactional. But it was still love. Saturday night arrived. I put on the dark blue dress. It fit perfectly. The silk felt cool against my skin. I did my hair in a sleek bun, the way the hospital regulations required, but softer. I applied the lipstick. I looked in the mirror. For the first time in years, I didn't see the tired nurse. I didn't see the taken child. I saw a woman who was about to arrive. Tonight is the turning point. I said to my reflection. My voice was steady. Tonight, you stop paying for your existence. Tonight, you start living it. I grabbed my purse. I grabbed my car keys. The keys I had promised to hand over to Tessa. I walked out to my car, unaware that every step I took was leading me toward a chair in the center of a room where my life was about to be dismantled. Piece by piece, I started the engine. The dashboard clock glowed 7 p.m. I was on time. I was always on time. I drove toward Wrenwood Terrace, blindly confident, while 75 people sat in silence, waiting for the defendant to arrive. The heavy oak doors of the Wrenwood Terrace private suite closed behind me with a decisive, mechanical click. It was not the sound of a party beginning. It was the sound of a cell door locking. A waiter, dressed in a stiff black vest, stood with his back against the wood, effectively barring the exit. I took 2 steps onto the plush carpet and stopped. My hands were still clutching the leather-bound photo album I had spent 3 weeks curating. The corners digging into my palms. I had expected noise. I had expected a shout of surprise, followed by the pop of champagne corks and the rustle of confetti. I had prepared my face for joy. Instead, I walked into a tribunal. The room was arranged not for a celebration, but for an interrogation. The round banquet tables had been pushed to the edges of the room, stacked with untouched china. In the center, rows of gold-backed chairs were set up in a semicircle, facing a single, isolated wooden seat. 75 people sat in those chairs. They turned their heads in unison as I entered. It was a wave of movement that felt choreographed. I saw Aunt Marlene, her face pale, looking down at her lap. I saw my cousin David, who refused to make eye contact, fixing his gaze on a water stain on the ceiling. I saw neighbors, family friends, and business associates of my father. No one smiled, no one waved. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the pounding of my own heart in my ears. Wade Mercer stood at the front of the room, behind a long table draped in white. Beside him was Celeste, her arms crossed tight across her chest, and Tessa, who was already holding her phone up, the camera lens a black eye fixed on my face. "Welcome, Tiffany," Wade said. His voice was not loud, but in the dead silence, it carried like a gavel strike. "Please, sit." He pointed to the lone wooden chair. I didn't move. My brain was misfiring, trying to reconcile the party I had imagined with the reality before me. "Dad, what is this? Where is the dinner?" "There is no dinner," Wade said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Tonight is not about celebration. Tonight is about accounting. Sit down." "I don't understand," I stammered, clutching the album tighter. You said you had a letter for me. The recommendation." Wade let out a short, dry laugh. "Oh, I have paperwork for you, but it is not a recommendation." He reached under the table and pulled out a large, stiff envelope. He didn't open it gently. He ripped the top off and extracted a document with a blue header. He held it up, even from 20 feet away. I could see the logo of a genetic testing laboratory. "We are here to correct the record," Wade announced, addressing the 75 people as if he were opening a shareholder meeting. "For 30 years, we have carried a burden that was not ours to carry. We have sheltered a stranger." He slapped the paper against the table. "This is the result of the DNA test we ran last week," he declared. 0% match. Tiffany is not a Mercer. She is not our blood. She is a biological stranger who has been squatting in our lives for 3 decades. The air left my lungs. You tested my hair? Without asking me?" "We needed proof," Celeste cut in. Stepping forward, her voice was trembling, but not with sadness. It was vibrating with a long-held resentment. "We needed everyone here to know the truth. You walk around with your head high, acting like you belong to this legacy. You don't. You are a charity case that overstayed its welcome." "Mom, stop," I whispered, looking around at the faces of my family, or the people I thought were my family. "Uncle Jerry? Why aren't you saying anything?" Uncle Jerry shifted in his seat, the wood creaking, but he didn't speak. He looked terrified. "They won't help you," Wade said. "They know the truth now. They know how much you have cost us." Celeste picked up a second document. This one was a spreadsheet, blown up and printed on a poster board. She propped it up against a pitcher of water. It was a grid of numbers, dates, and calculated interest rates. "Do you know how much it costs to raise a child in this country?" Celeste asked, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "Food, clothing, medical bills, school supplies, the prom dress you ruined, the braces, the piano lessons you quit." She pointed a manicured finger at the bottom line. $312,450.62, she read. "That is the principal, with the standard market interest rate applied over 30 years. The total debt is significantly higher, but we are generous people. We are only asking for the principal. Asking? I choked out. You are charging me for my childhood? It was an investment, Celeste screamed, losing her composure. And it was a bad one. You give nothing back. You take and you take. You act so superior with your little nursing job, sending us crumbs every month, $500 here, $700 there. It is an insult. It doesn't even cover the interest on what you owe us. Wade stepped in front of her, regaining control of the narrative. He slid a thick stack of papers across the smooth tablecloth toward the edge nearest me. This is a promissory note, Wade said calmly. It acknowledges the debt. It sets up a repayment plan. You will sign it tonight. We have a notary present. He gestured to a small man in a gray suit sitting in the front row. Not the man I had seen earlier, but a stranger with a stamp in his hand. I am not signing that, I said, my voice shaking. This is insane. You can't make me sign a debt for being a kid. Oh, I think you will, Wade said. He smiled, and it was the coldest thing I had ever seen. Because if you don't, I make a phone call. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket and tapped the screen. I had a lovely chat with Mrs. Higgins on the golf course yesterday, Wade said casually. She is very excited about your application for head nurse. She thinks you are a woman of integrity. Imagine her disappointment if she found out that you were currently being sued for financial fraud and elder abuse. My blood ran cold. What? If you don't sign, Wade said, his voice dropping to a whisper that echoed in the silent room. I will sue you. I will drag you through the courts, and I will call Mrs. Higgins and tell her that you have been stealing from us for years. I will tell her you manipulated us, took our money, and refused to pay it back. I am a pillar of this community. Tiffany, who do you think she will believe? The wealthy donor or the nurse with the lawsuit? I felt the room spin. He was weaponizing the very thing I had worked for. He was holding my future hostage to pay for my past. You're blackmailing me, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. This isn't a party. It is a shakedown. It is a settlement, Wade corrected. Sign the paper, commit to the payment plan, and we let you walk out of here with your career intact. And the car, Celeste added sharply. She marched toward me. I instinctively stepped back, but I was backed against the row of chairs. The car, Celeste repeated. Give me the keys. That is my car, I said. I pay the insurance. I pay the gas. It is in Wade's name, Celeste snapped. We bought it. You just drive it. It is a family asset. And since you are not family, you have no right to it. She lunged forward and grabbed my purse. I tried to pull it back, but she was fueled by a manic strength. She ripped the bag from my shoulder. Tearing the strap, she dug through it, throwing my wallet and my phone onto the floor. She found the keys and held them up triumphantly. Tessa, Celeste called out. Catch! She tossed the keys to my sister. Tessa caught them with one hand, not missing a beat of her filming. Did you guys see that? Tessa said to her phone screen, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. She tried to attack Mom. She literally tried to hit Mom over a set of car keys. This is what we deal with. This is the violence we have lived with for 30 years. I looked at Tessa. She was smiling behind the phone. She was enjoying this. This was her content. I was her content. Tessa, please, I begged. Stop filming. This is our life. This is the truth, Tessa shot back. The world needs to know you are a squatter. Tiffany, look at the comments. Everyone is on our side. They say you are toxic. They say we should have kicked you out when you were 18. I looked at the comments scrolling on her screen. They were a blur of angry emojis and hateful words from strangers who didn't know me, judging me based on a frame my sister had built. Sign the paper. Tiffany, Wade commanded. He uncapped a heavy fountain pen and set it on top of the promissory note. Do it now, before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. I looked at the paper. I tried to read the text, but Wade slammed his hand down over the paragraphs. Just the signature line, he barked. You don't need to read the boilerplate. It is standard. You owe us. You pay us. Sign. I looked around the room one last time. I looked at the faces of the people I had grown up with. Please, I said to the crowd, my voice breaking. Someone say something. You know me. You know I worked since I was 16. You know I took care of Grandma when she was sick. Does that count for nothing? Aunt Marlene made a small noise, like a whimper. She started to stand up, her hand clutching her purse. Sit down, Marlene, Wade roared, not even looking at her. Marlene collapsed back into her chair, sobbing silently into a tissue. I was completely alone. I was 30 years old, and I was being stripped of my name, my money, my car, and my dignity in a room full of witnesses who were too cowardly to speak. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I wasn't crying from sadness. I was crying from a rage so hot, it felt like it was melting my insides. I looked at the pen. If I signed, I would be in debt for the rest of my life. If I didn't sign, he would destroy my career. You have 10 seconds, Wade said. Checking his Rolex, I took a breath. I looked toward the back of the room, near the emergency exit, looking for an escape route. The waiter was still blocking the main doors, but in the shadows of the corner, I saw him again, the man in the gray suit. He was no longer leaning against the wall. He was standing fully upright, his posture rigid with tension. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at Wade with an expression that terrified me. It was the look of a predator watching prey make a fatal mistake. He raised his hand. It was a subtle movement, just 2 fingers lifting in the air. At his signal, the side door of the suite, the service entrance, burst open. A woman walked in. She was carrying a thick black accordion folder. She didn't look like a waiter. She wore a sharp navy pantsuit and glasses. She walked straight to the man in the gray suit and handed him the folder. The man took it. He stepped out of the shadows and into the light of the chandelier. Time is up, Wade said to me. I am dialing Mrs. Higgins. No, a deep voice boomed from the back of the room. You are not. Wade froze. The entire room turned. The man in the gray suit walked down the center aisle, passing the rows of stunned relatives. He walked with a heavy, deliberate cadence. He walked right up to the table where Wade stood. He didn't look at the promissory note. He looked Wade dead in the eye. Who are you? Wade demanded, his voice cracking slightly. The man ignored him. He turned to me. His eyes softened, and I saw that same pain I had glimpsed earlier, but now it was mixed with a fierce, protective resolve. Don't sign that. Tiffany, the man said. You don't owe these people a single penny. Who are you? Celeste shrieked. Security! Get him out! The man slammed the black folder onto the table, right on top of the DNA results. The sound was like a gunshot. My name is Graham Halston, he said, his voice ringing off the walls. And I suggest you put the phone down, Wade, because if anyone is going to prison tonight, it is not my daughter. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Wade's face went the color of ash. Celeste dropped her hand to her side. Tessa's live stream continued to run, capturing the moment the hunter became the hunted. Something shifted in the atmosphere of the room the moment Graham Halston spoke, but I did not let myself look at him. Not yet. My survival instinct, honed by 7 years of working in critical care, had finally kicked in. In the emergency room, there is a specific moment when panic becomes useless, when a patient is crashing, when the monitors are screaming and the blood is everywhere. You do not cry. You do not beg. You assess the damage. You check the vitals. You look for the source of the bleed, and you stop it. Wade and Celeste Mercer were no longer my parents. They were the trauma, and I had to stop the bleeding. I wiped the single tear from my cheek. It was cold. I took a deep, stabilizing breath, filling my lungs with the stale, recycled air of the hotel suite. I straightened my spine. I was not the terrified daughter anymore. I was the head nurse. I was the person who managed crises while others fell apart. Let me see the paper, I said. My voice was not loud, but it was steady. It cut through the murmuring of the 75 relatives like a scalpel. Wade blinked, thrown off by the sudden change in my tone. He had expected begging. He had expected me to crumble under the weight of his authority. He held the DNA result tighter against his chest. "I told you," Wade sneered, though his eyes darted nervously to the left. "It is conclusive. 0% match. You are not ours." "I heard you," I said, taking a step toward him. "But if you are going to ruin my life, garnish my wages, and destroy my reputation based on a piece of paper, I want to see the methodology. Show me the accreditation of the lab. Show me the chain of custody for the sample." Wade took a half step back. "The what?" "The chain of custody," I repeated, my voice hard and clinical. "You said you took hair from my brush. That is not a legal sample. Who collected it? Who witnessed it? Did you bag it? Did you seal it? How do I know it was my hair? How do I know it wasn't dog hair you swept off the floor?" "It is a certified lab," Celeste shouted, jumping in to defend her husband. "Do not get technical with us, Tiffany. The results are clear." "Show me the document," I commanded. I didn't ask. I ordered. I reached out. Wade hesitated, looking at the notary, then at the crowd. He realized that pulling the paper away would look suspicious. With a sneer of contempt, he thrust the paper toward me, but he didn't let go of the corner. I leaned in. I didn't need to read the whole thing. I just needed to see the header. It wasn't a forensic report. It wasn't from a medical geneticist. It was a printout from a commercial ancestry website, the kind you buy at a pharmacy for $99 during the holidays to see if you are Irish or Italian. I looked up at Wade, and for the first time that night, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator finding a weakness. "This is an ancestry report," I said, loud enough for the back row to hear. "Look at the footer. Wade, read the fine print. For recreational and informational purposes only, not admissible in legal proceedings." I looked at the crowd. I made eye contact with my cousin David, who was a paralegal. "Did you hear that, David?" I asked. "He is trying to extort $300,000 from me based on a recreational kit that explicitly states it cannot be used for legal identification. In a court of law, this is confetti." Wade ripped the paper out of my hand. His face was turning a blotchy, dangerous red. "The source doesn't matter," Wade yelled, spit flying from his lips. "The truth is the truth. You aren't our kid, and you owe us for every slice of bread you ate." "If the truth is the truth," I said, pressing my advantage, "then why the theater?" I gestured to the room, to the frozen waiters, to the terrified relatives, to the live stream that Tessa was still broadcasting. "Why bring everyone here?" I asked, turning to face the 75 silent witnesses. "If this was just a financial dispute, if this was just about a debt, you could have mailed me the bill. You could have sued me quietly. Why rent a private suite at Wrenwood Terrace? Why spend $5,000 on a party just to humiliate me?" "Because you deserve it!" Celeste shrieked. She was vibrating with rage, her perfect hair starting to come loose from its pins. "Because you needed to be exposed." "No," I said, shaking my head. "That doesn't make sense. Wade Mercer never spends a dime he doesn't have to. You don't spend $5,000 on a revenge party unless the return on investment is higher." I turned back to Wade. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. He wasn't just angry. He was terrified. He was looking at his watch again. "What is the rush?" "Wade?" I asked softly. "Why tonight? Why did you say on the phone that it had to be the 23rd? Why is there a deadline?" "There is no deadline," Wade barked, but his voice cracked. "Sign the promissory note. Sign it now, or I call Mrs. Higgins." "Why do you need a witness?" I pushed harder. "You brought a notary. You brought 75 people. You are live streaming it. You are desperate to create a public record that I agreed to this debt. Why?" "Because if you don't sign tonight, we lose everything," Celeste screamed. The words hung in the air like smoke. The room went dead silent. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant outside seemed to vanish. Celeste froze. She clamped a hand over her mouth, her eyes widening in horror as she realized what she had just vomited out. Wade whipped his head around and glared at her with such ferocity that I thought he might actually strike her. "Shut up, Celeste," he hissed. "Lose everything?" I repeated. My brain was racing, connecting the dots. "What do you lose, Mom? If I don't agree to pay you $300,000 tonight, what do you lose?" Tessa, who had been gleefully reading the hate comments on her stream, suddenly looked up. Her expression had changed. She looked confused. She looked at her phone screen. "Wait," Tessa said, her voice uncertain. "Mom? The chat? The chat is asking what you mean." "Turn that off," Wade roared at Tessa. I can't," Tessa stammered. "The engagement is huge. There are 4,000 people watching. They want to know why we would lose everything." "You are forcing me to sign a debt to cover a loss," I said. The realization hitting me. "You aren't trying to get your money back. You are trying to plug a hole. You are broke, aren't you?" "We are not broke," Wade shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "We are the Mercers. We own half this town." "Then why are you shaking?" I asked. In the second row, a small sound broke the standoff. It was Aunt Marlene Voss. She was the family's nervous bird, always fluttering, always anxious. She was clutching her oversized handbag to her chest as if it contained the crown jewels. "Don't," Marlene whispered. It was barely audible. I turned my head. "Marlene?" "Don't," she said again, louder this time. She was staring at Celeste, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and guilt. "Don't let them touch the receipts." The room seemed to tilt. "Receipts?" I asked. Wade abandoned his position at the table. He took 2 long strides toward the audience, pointing a finger at Marlene like a weapon. "Marlene, keep your mouth shut." Wade growled. "One word, and you know what happens. You know what I have on you." Marlene shrank back into her chair, trembling so hard her purse rattled. But the damage was done. The word was out there. Receipts. "What receipts, Marlene?" I asked, ignoring Wade. I walked toward her. I crouched down so I was eye level with her, ignoring the gasp of the crowd. "What are you talking about?" The ones in the bag," Marlene whimpered. "The ones from the bank? For years. I didn't want to keep them. Celeste made me." "Marlene!" Celeste screamed. "I will ruin you." "You are already ruining her," I shouted back at Celeste, standing up to shield my aunt. "Look at her. She is terrified of you." I turned to Tessa. "Is the camera getting this? Tessa? Is the live stream seeing how our parents treat their own sister?" Tessa looked pale. She looked at her phone. The chat says this looks like a cover-up. They are asking what the receipts are for." The narrative was flipping. I could feel it. The energy in the room was shifting from judgment to confusion, and from confusion to suspicion. The 75 jurors were starting to realize they weren't watching a trial. They were watching a crime in progress. Wade looked like a man watching his house burn down. He was losing control. He needed to end this. He turned back to the table, grabbed the promissory note, and uncapped the pen again. He marched toward me. "Enough," Wade yelled. "I don't care about the chat. I don't care about Marlene. You sign this paper. Tiffany, you sign it right now, acknowledging that you owe us every cent. Or so help me God. I will make sure you never work in healthcare again. I will destroy you." He shoved the paper into my chest. "Sign it!" he screamed. His face inches from mine. I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. I looked him in the eye. "No," I said. Wade raised his hand. For a split second, I thought he was going to hit me right there in front of everyone. His fist clenched. The violence in him was palpable. "Wade Mercer!" The voice came from behind me. It was deep, resonant, and carried the weight of absolute authority. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. Wade stopped. His hand froze in midair. He looked over my shoulder, and the color drained from his face so completely he looked like a corpse. I turned. Graham Halston, the man in the gray suit, had taken another step forward. He was no longer just an observer. He was the center of gravity in the room. He stood next to the woman with the black accordion folder, his hand resting on the table near the DNA results. He looked at Wade with a mixture of disgust and pity. "Put the pen down." "Wade," Graham said, "you have no business here." Wade stammered, but his voice was thin, reedy. "This is a family matter." "It ceased to be a family matter the moment you tried to extort a woman under duress," Graham said calmly. "Security!" Celeste yelled again, but her voice was weak. "Why is no one calling security?" "Because the security guards work for the venue," Graham said, not taking his eyes off Wade. "And the venue owner knows exactly who I am. They aren't going to remove me." "Celeste." Graham walked closer. He stopped just a few feet from where Wade and I were standing. The smell of expensive cologne and old tobacco smoke drifted from his suit. He looked at me and gave a small, reassuring nod. Then he looked at Wade. "You are trying to force her to sign a waiver," Graham said. "You are trying to force her to accept a debt she doesn't owe, to create a paper trail that invalidates her rights. You are doing this because you ran out of time." "I don't know what you're talking about," Wade lied, but he was backing away. "I think you do," Graham said. "I think you know exactly who I am, and I think you know why I am here." Graham reached into his inner jacket pocket. Wade flinched, as if expecting a gun, but Graham only pulled out a pair of reading glasses. He put them on slowly, deliberately. "I am not here to crash a party," Graham said, his voice dropping an octave, sending a shiver down my spine. "I am here because at midnight tonight, a statute of limitations expires. And you were hoping to trick her into signing her rights away before the clock struck 12. He looked at the 75 guests, then at Tessa's camera. Ensuring the world heard his next words, "You aren't asking for repayment, Wade," Graham announced. "You are staging a robbery, and I am here to stop you from stealing what belongs to my daughter." "My daughter!" The two words hung in the air, heavy and absolute, silencing the room more effectively than a gunshot. Graham Halston did not shout them. He did not scream them with the theatrical flair Wade had used all evening. He spoke them with a quiet, devastating certainty. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw my own reflection. I saw the shape of my nose. I saw the set of my jaw. I saw the source of the height that had always made me feel awkward standing next to the petite, bird-like Celeste. The silence lasted for a heartbeat, and then the room detonated. 75 people gasped at once. Chairs scraped against the floor as relatives stood up to get a better view. Phones that had been resting on laps were suddenly raised. Dozens of camera lenses focusing on the man in the gray suit, Tessa, who had been panicking just moments ago, instinctively turned her body so that both Graham and I were in the frame of her live stream. I could see the comments on her screen scrolling so fast they were a blur of color. "Liar!" Wade screamed. His voice was shrill, cracking with a desperation I had never heard before. "He is a liar! Security! Get this man out of here! He is crazy!" But Wade did not step forward. He stepped back. He looked at Graham with the wide, dilated eyes of an animal that knows the cage door has been locked from the outside. Graham did not even blink at Wade's outburst. He walked past my adoptive father as if he were a piece of furniture. He reached the table, cleared a space among the fake ancestry reports and the predatory promissory note, and opened the black accordion folder. "I am not here to debate you, Wade," Graham said, his voice calm, measured, and terrifyingly professional. "I am here to present the evidence you tried to burn." He pulled out a document. It was old. The paper was slightly yellowed, stamped with the seal of the state court. "Exhibit A," Graham said, holding it up for the room, and for Tessa's camera, to see. "The custody agreement dated October 14th, 1996, signed by Wade Mercer, Celeste Mercer, and myself." He laid it down and pulled out another. "Exhibit B, The death certificate of Elena Halston. I felt my knees buckle. Elena. Graham looked at me, and his expression softened into something heartbreaking. Your mother, he said softly. Her name was Elena. She died 3 days after you were born. She didn't abandon you, Tiffany. She died protecting you. I put a hand on the back of the wooden chair to steady myself. The room was spinning. Elena. I had a name. For 30 years. I had been told my mother was a drug addict, a runaway, a shadow. And finally, Graham continued, his voice hardening as he turned back to Wade. Exhibit C, the financial ledger. He pulled out a thick stack of bank statements. They were stapled together, inches thick. He fanned them out on the table like a winning poker hand. For 30 years, Graham said, addressing the mesmerized crowd. The Mercer family has received a monthly stipend from the Elena Halston Trust. It was not a small amount. It was adjusted for inflation. It covered housing. It covered education. It covered medical expenses. It covered clothing. He picked up one sheet and read from it. January 2015, wire transfer, $5,000. Notation, tuition and board. He picked up another. August 2020, wire transfer, $6,500. Notation, living expenses. Graham looked at Celeste. She was trembling so violently that her bracelets were jingling. You told her she was a burden, Graham said, his voice dripping with disgust. You told her she cost you money. You presented her with a bill for $300,000 tonight. But the truth is, Celeste, you have been paid over $2 million in the last 30 years to be her mother. The gasp from the crowd was audible. It sounded like the air being sucked out of the room. $2 million? Someone whispered in the back row. That is a lie, Celeste shrieked. That was for administration. That was for our pain and suffering. Pain and suffering? Graham repeated, stepping closer to her. You were paid a salary to love a child, and you couldn't even do the bare minimum. You took the money, bought your cars, renovated your house, funded your biological daughter's lifestyle, and then you made Tiffany pay for her own existence. I stared at the papers. The numbers blurred. $5,000 a month, $6,000. I thought about the time I asked for $20 for a field trip, and Wade told me we couldn't afford it. I thought about the time I worked double shifts at the diner during nursing school because Wade said there was no money for tuition. I thought about the car insurance I paid, the groceries I bought. They hadn't just been mean. They had been embezzling my life. Why? I whispered. The word felt small in the chaos of the room. Why do this? If you had the money, why treat me like this? Because of the clause, Graham said. He turned to the last section of the accordion folder. He pulled out a single, pristine document. It looked newer than the others. Elena knew, Graham said, looking at me. She knew that money does strange things to people. So when she set up the trust, she included a failsafe. It is known as the Age of 30 Protocol. He held the document up. On the day Tiffany Reyes turns 30, Graham read, the control of the trust transfers entirely to her. The stipend to the guardians ceases immediately. And most importantly, the guardians are legally required to disclose the full accounting of the trust and the identity of her biological parents. He lowered the paper and looked at Wade. 3 months ago, Graham said, the trust management firm sent you a notice. They reminded you that the clock was ticking. They reminded you that on April 23rd, the gravy train stops. The money you have been living on, the money you have been using to prop up your status in this town, goes to Tiffany. The pieces slammed into place in my mind with the force of a physical blow. The airtight party, the sudden deadline, the lawyer talk on the phone. You knew, I said, turning to Wade. My voice wasn't shaking anymore. You knew you were going to lose the income, so you tried to create a debt that was bigger than the trust. It was a hedge, Wade shouted, abandoning his denial. We raised you. We deserve a severance. That trust is worth millions. You think you can just walk away with it? We are the ones who dealt with your tantrums. We are the ones who fed you. You were employees, Graham roared. And you were fired for cause years ago. You just didn't know it yet. Graham gestured to the woman in the navy suit who had brought the folder. This is Mrs. Alvarez, Graham said. She is a court-certified forensic accountant and a witness, and the gentleman standing by the door, the real security, is my attorney. He pointed to the promissory note that Wade had been trying to force me to sign. That piece of paper, Graham said, is an attempt to defraud a beneficiary. Wade knew that if Tiffany signed a debt acknowledgement before midnight, he could argue in court that the debt should be deducted from the trust assets. He was trying to drain the account before she even got access to it. He wanted to garnish her inheritance to pay a fake debt. I looked at the promissory note. $312,000. It wasn't a reimbursement. It was a heist. And the letter? I asked, looking at Wade. The recommendation letter for the hospital? Was that fake too? Wade sneered. The mask of the benevolent community leader was completely gone. He looked ugly, small, and vicious. There was no letter, Wade spat. I called Mrs. Higgins. All right, I told her you were unstable. I told her to hold off on hiring you until we settled our family legal issues. I needed leverage. I needed you terrified. Fear makes people sign things. My heart went cold. He had sabotaged my career. He had poisoned my reputation just to make me vulnerable enough to rob. You monster, I whispered. I am a businessman, Wade yelled. And you are an ungrateful brat. We took you in when no one wanted you. I wanted her. Graham stepped between us, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. I wanted her every single day for 30 years. Then where were you? I asked. The question cut through the anger. I looked at Graham. He was my father. He had the receipts. He had the truth. But he had been a ghost. Where were you? I repeated. If you loved me, why did you leave me with them? Graham looked at me, and his shoulders slumped. The powerful man in the suit looked suddenly old and tired. Because I was weak, he said. And because I was legally bound, he tapped the custody agreement. When Elena died, her family, your grandparents, blamed me. They had money. They had influence. They painted me as unfit. They said I couldn't raise a child alone. They petitioned the court to place you with a stable, traditional family. The Mercers. He looked at Wade with pure hatred. Wade and Celeste were the golden couple back then, Graham said. They looked perfect on paper. The court sided with them, and as part of the agreement, to prevent confusion for the child, I was ordered to stay away. No contact, no visits, until you were 18. I am 30, I said. That was 12 years ago. I tried, Graham said. When you turned 18, I hired a private investigator. I wanted to reach out, but the report came back. It said you were happy. He laughed bitterly. The Mercers are good at PR. Tiffany, the investigator saw the photos, the nice house, the college enrollment. He told me you were thriving. He told me you were close to your sister. I thought if I walked into your life then, I would just be wrecking a happy home. I thought I would be the villain. He looked at me, his eyes wet. I thought I was giving you peace by staying away. I didn't know I was leaving you in a shark tank. He gestured to the room. Then, 3 months ago, the trust officer contacted me. They told me about the upcoming transfer, and they told me that Wade had been making inquiries about liquidating assets and preemptive debt collection. That is when I knew. Happy families don't try to liquidate their children. He stepped closer to me. He didn't try to hug me. He respected the distance. I have been watching you for the last 4 weeks, Graham admitted. I saw you at the hospital. I saw how hard you work. I saw you driving that car that looks like it is about to fall apart. And I saw the wire transfers you sent them. That is when I realized I had made the biggest mistake of my life. He turned to the notary Wade had brought, the small man who was now trying to inch away from the table. You, Graham said. Mr. Henderson, is it? The notary gulped. I was just hired to witness a signature. You were hired to witness a felony, Graham said. My attorney has already filed an injunction. If you stamp anything tonight, You will be named as a co-conspirator in a fraud case. Mr. Henderson dropped his stamp as if it were burning hot. He stood up, grabbed his briefcase, and practically ran toward the exit. And you, Graham said, turning to the waiter at the door. Open the doors, now. The waiter scrambled to obey. The heavy oak doors swung open, revealing the curious faces of restaurant patrons in the hallway. The courtroom was unsealed. I looked at Celeste. She had collapsed into her chair, weeping. But they weren't tears of remorse. She was crying because the math had turned against her. She was looking at Aunt Marlene with venomous eyes, mouthing the word traitor. I looked at Tessa. She had lowered her phone. She looked pale, sick. She was looking at the comments. What are they saying? Tessa? I asked. My voice was calm. I felt a strange, cold clarity washing over me. Tessa looked up, her eyes wide with panic. They are saying Dad is a thief. They are finding public records of the trust. Someone just posted the deed to this house. It is in the trust's name. Of course it is, Graham said. The house belongs to Tiffany. It always has. Wade looked like he was having a stroke. He was clutching the edge of the table, his knuckles white. It is not hers, Wade hissed. We maintained it. We paid the taxes. With her money, Graham corrected. I walked over to the table. I looked at the promissory note. The paper that was supposed to enslave me. I picked it up. You wanted me to sign this, I said to Wade. You wanted me to admit that I owed you for my life. You do, Wade snarled, though he had no teeth left. We gave you a home. You gave me a room in a boarding house, I said. And you were overpaid for it. I ripped the promissory note in half, then in half again. The sound of tearing paper was the only sound in the room. I let the pieces flutter down onto the table, covering the fake ancestry report. I am not signing anything, I said. And I am not paying you a dime. In fact, according to Mr. Halston's math, you owe me a refund. I turned to Graham. I didn't know him. He was a stranger in a nice suit, but he was the only person in 30 years who had stood between me and the wolves. Is it true? I asked him. About the trust? About the house? Every word, Graham said. My lawyer has the full accounting. At midnight. Legally. You own the roof they are sleeping under. I looked at the 75 guests. They were no longer a jury. They were just a crowd of embarrassed people who had been caught watching a crime. Get out, I said. They didn't move fast enough. I said, get out, I yelled, my voice finally breaking the dam of my composure. The party is over. Go home. They scrambled. Chairs were knocked over. Coats were grabbed. People who had known me my whole life, people who had sat there and watched me be humiliated, couldn't get to the door fast enough. They didn't look at me. They didn't apologize. They just ran. Within a minute, the room was empty of guests. It was just me, Graham, his team, and the Mercers. Wade stood by the table, defeated but still defiant. Celeste was sobbing. Tessa was standing in the corner, holding her phone like a shield. This isn't over, Wade said, pointing a shaking finger at Graham. I have rights, squatters' rights, adverse possession. You have nothing, Graham said. And tomorrow morning, you will have even less. I looked at Tiffany, at myself, in the mirror on the wall, the woman in the blue dress. I wasn't the daughter they wanted. I was the landlord they feared, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt expensive. Graham, I said. It felt weird to say his name. Can we go? I don't want to be here anymore. Yes, Graham said. My car is outside. He offered me his arm. I hesitated. I looked at Wade one last time. You said I wasn't your daughter, I said to him. You were right. I'm not. I'm your employer, and you're fired. I took Graham's arm. We turned to leave, but before we reached the door, Tessa spoke. Tiffany? She whispered. I stopped. I didn't turn around. Am I? Tessa's voice was small, trembling. Am I going to lose my room? I looked at the phone in her hand. The live stream was finally off. "You should have thought about that before you hit record," I said. I walked out of the Wrenwood Terrace. Stepping over the threshold and into the night air, it tasted like rain. It tasted like freedom. But as I walked toward the sleek black sedan waiting at the curb, I knew the battle wasn't over. Wade Mercer wasn't the kind of man who let go of a gold mine without detonating the mine shaft, and I had a feeling the explosion was just beginning. I had one foot out the door, my hand resting on the crook of Graham Halston's arm, ready to leave the wreckage of my former life behind. I thought the show was over. I thought the audience, shamed and horrified, had scattered into the night, but the Mercer family was not done destroying itself. The detonation cord had been lit, and the explosions were about to come in a chain reaction that no amount of damage control could stop. It started with a wail. It was a high, thin sound, like a kettle boiling over. Coming from the second row of chairs, I stopped. Graham paused, his body tense, ready to shield me. I turned back. Aunt Marlene was standing up. She was not running for the exit like the others. She was trembling so violently that her knees knocked together. Her face was blotchy and wet with tears. Her eyes fixed on Celeste with a look of pure, terrified defiance. "I can't," Marlene sobbed, her voice gaining volume. "I can't hold it anymore. Celeste, I won't go to jail for you." "I won't do it." "Marlene, shut your mouth," Celeste shrieked, lunging toward her sister, but Marlene was faster. She ripped open the oversized designer handbag she had been clutching all night like a life preserver. She didn't just reach inside, she upended the bag. She dumped its contents onto the empty chair next to her. It wasn't lipstick or tissues that fell out, it was paper. Dozens of small rectangular slips of paper fluttered down like confetti, pink slips, yellow slips, the distinct carbon copy texture of bank deposit receipts. "She made me do it," Marlene yelled to the room, to the lingering guests who had frozen near the doors, and most importantly, to Graham. "She said it was tax planning. She said it was to protect the family assets. But I kept them. I kept every single one because I was scared." Graham released my arm and walked back toward the chairs. He moved with the precision of a hawk spotting a field mouse. He picked up a handful of the papers. He scanned them, his eyes narrowing behind his reading glasses. "Cash deposits," Graham announced, his voice echoing off the walls. "Structured under $10,000 to avoid federal reporting requirements, deposited into a secondary account under Marlene Voss's name, then transferred back to a shell LLC owned by Wade Mercer." He held up a pink slip. $9,500, dated 3 days after the monthly trust wire transfer hit. He picked up another. $9,000, dated the following month. Graham turned to Wade, who was now leaning against the table, looking like he was about to vomit. "You weren't just spending the money," Graham said, his voice cold with realization. "You were laundering it. You were siphoning the trust funds through your sister-in-law so that on your official tax returns, it looked like you were supporting Tiffany out of your own pocket. You created a paper trail of poverty while you were hiding a mountain of gold." The room erupted. The silence that had held the guests captive broke into a cacophony of whispers and gasps. "That is my money!" Celeste screamed, her composure shattering completely. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "It was care fees, administrative costs. Do you know how hard it is to raise a child that isn't yours? I earned that money. I earned every cent." "By doing what?" I asked, walking back into the fray. My voice was steady, fueled by a cold, hard anger. "By making me wear secondhand clothes? By making me pay for my own school lunches? You took $6,000 a month for my care, and I was eating peanut butter sandwiches because you said we were tight this month. We were building a future," Celeste argued, but her eyes were darting around the room, seeing the disgust on the faces of her friends. "We were saving it." "For who?" I asked. "Not for me." I looked at the receipts on the chair. There were hundreds of them. Years of theft, neatly documented by a terrified aunt who knew, deep down, That judgment day was coming. "You are sick," a voice said from the back. It was Uncle Jerry. He hadn't left. He was standing by the door, his face gray. "Celeste, Wade, you told us you were struggling. You borrowed $2,000 from me last year for a business emergency. You were sitting on millions?" "It is complicated, Jerry," Wade barked, trying to regain authority. "You don't understand high finance." "I understand theft," Jerry said. He turned and walked out the door, spitting on the floor as he passed the threshold. That was the turning point. The crowd, which had been paralyzed by shock, now turned hostile. The look in their eyes shifted from confusion to revulsion. They weren't just witnessing a family squabble, they were witnessing a crime. And they had been invited to applaud it. But the nightmare wasn't over for the Mercers. I looked at Tessa. She was still standing in the corner, near the head table. She held her phone with both hands, her knuckles white. She wasn't filming B-roll anymore. She was live-streaming her family's funeral. "Turn it off, Tessa," Wade growled, noticing the red light still blinking. "I told you to turn that damn thing off." I can't," Tessa stammered, staring at the screen. "The app is frozen. It is glitching. There are too many comments." "Give it to me." Wade lunged for her. He grabbed the phone from her hands, but in his panic, he didn't hit the end button. He fumbled it. The phone clattered onto the table, the camera lens facing upward, capturing the ceiling and the audio with crystal clarity. "You idiot!" Wade shouted at Tessa. "You useless girl! You just broadcasted everything. You ruined us." "I didn't mean to," Tessa wailed. "I was just trying to help." "Help?" Wade sneered. "You just handed the police a confession. I told you to get the sympathy angle. I told you to make her look like the villain so we could pressure her into signing the debt waiver. If she doesn't sign, we go to jail. You stupid child. We lose the house. We lose the cars. We lose everything." The phone on the table picked up every word. "And her career?" Tessa whimpered. "You said you would ruin her career." "I will," Wade roared, forgetting the microphone was live. "I will call every hospital in the state. I will tell them she is a thief. I will burn her reputation to the ground until she has to beg us to stop." I stood there, watching them. It was almost too easy. They were doing the work for me. "Wade," Graham said softly, "the phone is still on." Wade froze. He looked at the phone on the table. He looked at the chat scrolling furiously on the screen. Recorded. One comment said, "Send this to the police," said another. "He just admitted to extortion," said a third. Wade snatched the phone and smashed it against the table edge. The screen shattered. The light went out, but the internet is forever. The stream had been cloud saved. I walked over to Tessa. She was trembling, looking at the broken phone as if it were a dead pet. "Tessa," I said. She looked up at me, her eyes wet with self-pity. "Tiffany, I didn't know. I swear. They just told me to film." "Stop lying," I said. I reached into my memory, pulling out a detail that had been nagging me all night. The way she had been so desperate to borrow my car. The way she had known exactly when to start filming. "You knew about the age of 30 clause," I stated. It wasn't a question. "No," Tessa shook her head rapidly. "No, I didn't. 3 months ago," I said, my voice hard. "When the trust officer sent the disclosure notice to Wade, you read his emails. Tessa, you handle his digital correspondence because he can't figure out how to attach a PDF. You saw the email." Tessa's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted to Celeste, then back to me. She started, then stopped. "You asked to borrow my car tonight," I continued, pressing her. "Why? You hate my car. Unless you wanted to be seen driving it. Unless you wanted people to think you were the humble sister while I was being destroyed inside. You knew I was going to lose everything tonight. You knew they were going to strip me of my assets. I just wanted to help Mom and Dad," Tessa whispered, the confession slipping out. They said if we didn't get you to sign, the money would stop. They said I would have to get a real job. They said I would lose my studio. So you helped them frame me, I said. For a studio? For a lighting rig? I looked at my sister. I saw the 20 years of shared holidays, the times I had braided her hair, the times I had covered for her when she snuck out. It all dissolved. She wasn't a victim. She was an accomplice. You are just like them, I said. Just then, a movement in the crowd caught my eye. Most of the guests were huddled near the exit, afraid to leave, but afraid to stay. But one woman was standing still, right in the middle of the room. She was wearing a sharp black blazer and holding a glass of water that she hadn't taken a sip of all night. My heart stopped. It was Naomi Keller. Naomi was the chief nursing officer at Seabrook Critical Care. She was 3 levels above me. She was the woman who had final approval on the head nurse position. I hadn't seen her come in. She must have been a +1, a distant acquaintance of one of the cousins. She had seen everything. She had seen me being accused of fraud. She had seen my father scream at me. She had seen the DNA results. Panic flared in my chest. My job. Wade had threatened to call Mrs. Higgins, but Naomi Keller was right here. She had witnessed the circus. She would think I was drama. She would think I was a liability. Hospitals don't hire people whose lives are exploding in live-streamed scandals. I took a step toward her, my hands shaking. Mrs. Keller, I didn't know you were here. Naomi looked at me. Her face was unreadable. She was a woman known for her stoicism in the boardroom. She looked at Wade, who was panting by the table. She looked at the torn promissory note. She looked at the receipts scattered on the chair. Then, she pulled out her phone. Mrs. Keller, please, I pleaded softly. I can explain. This doesn't affect my work. Naomi held up a hand to stop me. She wasn't looking at me. She was typing. I am texting human resources, Naomi said. Her voice was calm, professional, the voice of a woman who ran a 1,000-bed hospital. And I am texting the legal department. My stomach dropped. Please, don't. I withdraw my application. Just don't put this on my record. Naomi looked up from her screen. For the first time, her expression softened. Tiffany, she said, I am not reporting you. I am documenting a threat against an employee. I blinked. What? I just sent a sworn statement to our general counsel, Naomi said, loud enough for Wade to hear. I witnessed Wade Mercer threaten to use his influence to damage the career of a Seabrook employee for the purpose of extortion. That is a felony, and it is a direct attack on the integrity of our institution. She turned her gaze to Wade. It was a look that could peel paint. Mr. Mercer, Naomi said, if you make one phone call to my hospital, or to any hospital in this state, our legal team will file a restraining order and a defamation suit so fast your head will spin. We protect our nurses, especially the competent ones. Wade opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He had thought he could bully a daughter. He didn't realize he was picking a fight with a healthcare conglomerate. Thank you, I whispered to Naomi. Thank you. Naomi nodded once. See you on Monday. Ms. Reyes, you have an interview to ace. Wade, realizing the walls were closing in from every side, financial, legal, and social, made one last, desperate play. Get them out, Wade screamed, pointing at Graham. I want them off my property. Security. Where's the security? 2 uniformed guards from the venue hesitated near the doorway. They looked confused. Wade Mercer was the client who paid the bill, but the situation was clearly out of control. Remove him, Wade yelled. He is trespassing. He is disrupting a private event. The guards took a step forward. Hold on, a voice said. It was the man standing by the door, Graham's attorney. He stepped forward. Opening a leather briefcase, he pulled out a document stamped with a judge's seal. This is a temporary injunction granted by the circuit court this afternoon, the attorney said. It freezes all assets of the Elena Halston Trust, including the real estate located at this address and the primary residence of the guardians, pending an audit. He walked over to the guards and showed them the paper. Mr. Mercer does not have the authority to remove anyone, the attorney said. In fact, legally speaking, he is currently occupying a venue paid for by funds that are under dispute. If anyone is trespassing, it is him. The guards looked at the paper, then at Wade. They stepped back, folding their arms. They weren't touching Graham. It is over, Wade, Graham said. The law is here. The witnesses are here. The receipts are here. At that moment, the dam finally broke for the guests. The reality of the police involvement, the fraud, and the frozen assets was too much. I am leaving, Cousin David said, standing up abruptly. I can't be here. I have a license to protect. Me too, another uncle said. They moved like a tide. 70 people who had sat in judgment of me 10 minutes ago now scrambled for the exits like rats fleeing a sinking ship. They didn't look at me. They didn't say goodbye to Celeste. They just wanted to be as far away as possible before the subpoenas started flying. Within seconds, the room was cavernous. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a tomb. Graham walked over to me. He reached into his inside pocket again. There is one more thing, he said. He pulled out a small, cream-colored envelope. It was old. The paper was brittle. The handwriting on the front faded but elegant. For my daughter, Tiffany, to be opened when she is safe. Elena wrote this, Graham said, his voice thick with emotion. She wrote it the day before she went into surgery. She made me promise to give it to you when you were free of them. My hands shook as I took the envelope. I ran my thumb over the handwriting. My mother's handwriting. I opened it. There was a single sheet of paper inside. The ink was blue. I read the first line, and I felt my breath hitch in my throat. My darling girl, if you are reading this, it means they ran out of time to tell the truth. It means that for 30 years, they chose the money over you. I am so sorry I couldn't be there to fight them, but I left you a shield, and I left you a sword. The money is the shield. The truth is the sword. Use them. Do not forgive them because you think you have to. Forgive them only if they deserve it. And if they don't, walk away. You are not a debt. Tiffany, you are a gift. Love, Mom. I lowered the letter. The tears finally came, hot and fast. Not tears of shame, tears of release. She knew, I whispered. She knew what they were like. She suspected, Graham said. She hoped she was wrong, but she prepared for the worst. I looked up at Wade and Celeste. They were standing by the ruins of their scheme. The torn promissory note, the scattered receipts, the broken phone. They looked small. They looked pathetic. She told me to walk away, I said to them. I folded the letter and placed it against my heart. So I am walking. I walked out of the Wrenwood Terrace, and the humid night air hit me like a physical wall, thick with the scent of impending rain and exhaust fumes. I did not look back. I did not turn to see if Wade was chasing me, or if Celeste had fainted, or if the 75 guests were still scrambling for their cars. I just wanted to be gone. Graham Halston held the passenger door of his black sedan open for me. I slid onto the leather seat, the coolness of the air conditioning drying the sweat on the back of my neck. As the door thudded shut, sealing me inside this bubble of expensive silence, I realized I wasn't feeling the rush of victory. I wasn't pumping my fist or laughing. I felt like I had just finished a 12-hour shift in the trauma unit where every single patient had died. I felt hollowed out. Where do you want to go? Graham asked, as he slid into the driver's seat. He didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with deference, like I was a fragile explosive that might go off if handled incorrectly. Anywhere, I said. Just not home. I don't think I have a home anymore. You have a house, Graham corrected gently, starting the engine. But we can worry about that tomorrow. Tonight, we just drive. As we pulled away from the curb, I saw a notification pop up on the cracked screen of my phone, the one Celeste had thrown on the floor and I had retrieved before leaving. It was a push notification from the social media app Tessa used. Tessa Mercer is live. The aftermath. I stared at it. I shouldn't have clicked. I should have thrown the phone out the window. But I tapped the screen. The video feed was chaotic. The image was fractured, a spiderweb of cracks obscuring the center. And the angle was tilted, staring up at the acoustic tiles of the ceiling. Wade must have smashed the screen but failed to kill the broadcast. The camera was dead, but the microphone was very much alive, and 4,000 people were listening to the audio of my family destroying itself. "You moron!" Wade's voice screeched through my phone speaker, tinny and distorted. "You told me the lawyer fixed the loophole. You told me the trust was watertight. I told you to pay the tax on the transfers." Celeste's voice screamed back, shrill and hysterical. "I told you that moving the money through Marlene was risky, but no. You had to be greedy. You had to buy that boat. You had to join the country club. I did that for appearances," Wade yelled. "To maintain our standing, so you could walk around town like a queen. And now? Now we are going to be homeless because you couldn't get her to sign one piece of paper." "Don't blame me," Celeste sobbed. "I told you she was getting suspicious. I told you she was asking about the birth certificate. You were the one who got cocky. You were the one who wanted the party." I watched the listener count climb. 5,000, 6,000. The comments were flying so fast they were unreadable. Mercer fraud was already trending. Justice for Tiffany was right behind it. "Turn it off," I whispered, locking my phone screen. "I can't listen to them anymore." Graham reached over and turned up the radio, drowning out the memory of their voices with soft jazz. We drove in silence, putting miles between me and the people who had raised me as a livestock investment. The next 48 hours were a blur of dissociation. I stayed at a hotel downtown, paid for by Graham. I slept for 14 hours straight, my body shutting down to repair the damage of 30 years of stress. When I finally turned my phone back on Monday morning, the world had shifted on its axis. Tessa was finished. The internet, in its brutal, efficient way, had dissected her entire digital life. The clips of her mocking me, the clips of her flashing my car keys, the audio of her admitting she knew about the trust. It had all been compiled into video essays titled "The Downfall of Tessa Mercer" and "How to Fake a Perfect Life." Her sponsors had dropped her. The beauty brand she had been promoting sent out a public statement distancing themselves from values that do not align with our company. She had lost 90% of her followers overnight, leaving only the hate watchers. She was branded. She wasn't just the sister of the victim. She was the girl who exploited her sister for clout and got caught in 4K resolution. I felt a pang of something that wasn't quite sympathy, but close to it. Tessa had been raised on a diet of validation and superficiality. She never stood a chance of being a decent person, but then I remembered her face when she asked about losing her room, and the sympathy evaporated. Then there was the text from Aunt Marlene. It had come in at 3 o'clock on Sunday morning. "Tiffany, I am so sorry. I know sorry doesn't fix it. Please know I didn't want to hold those receipts. I tried to say no, but Celeste knew about the incident in 1999. She knew I had a shoplifting charge that I expunged. She threatened to tell my husband. She threatened to tell my boss. She owned me. Tiffany, I was weak. I hope one day you can forgive a cowardly old woman. I am ready to talk to the police." I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I screenshotted the text and emailed it to Graham's lawyer. It was evidence. Monday morning. I put on my scrubs. It felt strange to zip up the familiar blue fabric. It felt like putting on a costume from a previous life. I drove to Seabrook Critical Care Center, parking my battered Honda Civic in the far lot. I walked toward the entrance with my head down. Terrified that someone would mention the live stream, I didn't make it to the locker room. "Ms. Reyes," the receptionist called out. "Mrs. Higgins wants to see you in her office. Immediately." My stomach dropped. This was it. Wade had sent the email. I walked to the administrative suite, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knocked on the door. "Come in," Mrs. Higgins said. I entered. Mrs. Higgins was sitting behind her desk, Standing next to her, looking out the window, was Naomi Keller, the chief nursing officer. "Sit down, Tiffany," Naomi said. Turning around, I sat. I clasped my hands in my lap to stop them from shaking. "We received an email from your father yesterday," Mrs. Higgins began, her voice neutral. "It was quite lengthy. He made several serious allegations regarding your mental health, your financial stability, and your ethics." "It is not true," I said quickly. "He is—" "We know," Naomi interrupted. She walked over and sat on the edge of the desk, crossing her arms. "We saw the video, Tiffany." I flinched. "I am so sorry. I know it is unprofessional to have my personal life broadcasted like that. I can resign if—" "Resign?" Naomi laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Tiffany, do you know what I saw in that video? I saw a woman surrounded by 70 hostile people, being screamed at, threatened, and blackmailed. And I saw that woman ask for the chain of custody on a DNA sample. I saw her identify a fraudulent document. I saw her de-escalate a volatile situation without raising her voice." She leaned forward. "You didn't crack," Naomi said. "In the middle of the worst night of your life, you acted like a head nurse. You assessed. You triaged. You executed." Mrs. Higgins slid a folder across the desk. "We aren't firing you," Mrs. Higgins said, actually smiling. "We are offering you the position, effective immediately. The pay bump is 20% higher than the initial offer." I stared at the folder. "Really?" "Really," Naomi said. "Also, our legal department sent a cease and desist letter to Wade Mercer this morning via courier. We informed him that any further contact with you at this facility, or any further defamation of our staff, will result in immediate litigation. He won't bother you here again." I walked out of that office 10 minutes later. Clutching my promotion letter, I went to the locker room, sat on a bench, and cried for exactly 60 seconds. Then I washed my face, put on my badge, and went to work. That evening, I met Graham. He had suggested a place called the Diner on 4th. It was a greasy spoon with vinyl booths and menus that stuck to the table. It was the kind of place I went to after a double shift. It was not the kind of place where men in $2,000 suits ate. But there he was, sitting in a corner booth, wearing a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than the grill he was sitting next to. He looked out of place, but he also looked trying. "I ordered you a coffee," he said as I sat down. "Black, 2 sugars. That is how you drank it in the break room at the hospital. I noticed." "You were stalking me," I said, but there was no venom in it. "I was observing," he corrected with a small, sad smile. "There is a difference." We sat in silence for a moment. The waitress dropped off a plate of fries. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, picking at a fry. "I don't know how to be your daughter. I don't even know what to call you." "Graham is fine," he said. "We don't need to force the titles. Titles are earned." "Why didn't you fight harder?" I asked. It was the question that had been burning a hole in my chest for 2 days. "I know the court order. I know the Mercers were powerful. But 30 years. Graham? You missed my whole life." Graham looked down at his coffee. He looked older in the harsh fluorescent light of the diner. "I was a coward," he said simply. "When Elena died, I fell apart. I was 25. I had no money, no family support. The Mercers came in like saviors. They had the nursery ready. They had the bank accounts. They convinced me that keeping you would be selfish. They said, 'Do you want her to struggle with you or thrive with us?'" He looked up at me, his eyes wet. "I thought I was making the noble choice. I thought I was sacrificing my happiness for yours. By the time I realized they were monsters, I had signed away my rights, and then fear took over. Fear that you would hate me for giving you up. Fear that I would disrupt your happy life." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. "This is the trust agreement," Graham said. "Elena wrote it herself. She was smarter than me. She was smarter than all of them." He flipped to page 42. "We talked about the age of 30 protocol," Graham said. "But there is a subsection I didn't mention at the party because I wanted to be sure. He pointed to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. Subsection D, fraudulent concealment. Graham read, if the guardians are found to have willfully concealed the existence of the trust, or if they attempt to coerce the beneficiary into waiving their rights, the penalty is not just the return of the funds. I leaned in. What is the penalty? Treble damages, Graham said. It means they have to pay back 3 times the amount they misappropriated, and if they cannot pay, the trust places a lien on all personal assets held by the guardians to satisfy the debt. I did the math in my head. $2 million in stipends over 30 years, multiplied by 3. $6 million? I whispered. Plus interest, Graham added. They don't just lose the house they're living in. Tiffany, they lose everything. Their retirement accounts, their investments, the boat, the jewelry. It all belongs to you now. I don't want their money, I said, feeling a wave of nausea. I just want them gone. It isn't their money, Graham said firmly. It is your mother's money. It is the life she wanted you to have, and taking it back isn't greed. It is justice. We finished our meal in a comfortable silence. When we walked out to the parking lot, Graham stopped by my car. He looked at the dented bumper of the Honda Civic. We really need to get you a safer car, he noted. I earned this car, I said defensively. I know, he said, and I'm proud of that. But you don't have to struggle anymore. Tiffany, you can rest. I drove home, or rather, back to the hotel, feeling a strange lightness. The burden of the debt was gone. The burden of pleasing them was gone. 2 days later, the package arrived. It was delivered to the hospital mailroom. A thick, heavy envelope sent via certified mail from the district attorney's office. I signed for it, my hand shaking slightly. I took it to the break room and opened it. It wasn't just a notification of a lawsuit. It was a subpoena for a grand jury indictment. State versus Wade Mercer, State versus Celeste Mercer, charges, grand larceny, fraud, extortion, money laundering. I scanned the document, feeling a grim satisfaction, but then my eyes caught a third name on the list of indictments, a name I hadn't expected to see on a criminal docket. I had expected them to go after Tessa for being an accomplice, or maybe Marlene for the receipts. But the third name wasn't Tessa, and it wasn't Marlene. My breath hitched. State versus Naomi Keller. I dropped the paper. Naomi? My boss? The woman who had just promoted me? The woman who had defended me against Wade? I scrambled to pick up the paper, reading the summary of charges under her name. Charge: conspiracy to commit fraud, professional misconduct. Details: evidence suggests that Naomi Keller, acting in her capacity as a hospital administrator, accepted 3 separate bribes from Wade Mercer between 2015 and 2020 to suppress incident reports and falsify employment records, ensuring the victim, Tiffany Reyes, remained in a lower wage position to maintain financial dependence on the guardians. The room spun. Naomi hadn't promoted me because she was impressed. She hadn't defended me because she had integrity. She had promoted me to buy my silence. She had cut ties with Wade not because she was disgusted, but because she was terrified that if he went down, he would take her with him. She had been part of it, the stagnation of my career, the years of being passed over for raises. It wasn't bad luck. It was a paid service. I looked up at the break room door, half expecting Naomi to be standing there. The hospital, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like another cage. I wasn't just fighting my parents anymore. I was fighting the system they had paid to keep me down. I picked up my phone and dialed Graham. "Graham," I said when he answered, "don't send the car home. Send it to the hospital. We have a bigger problem." The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old paper, a stark contrast to the expensive perfume and hors d'oeuvres that had filled the air at the Wrenwood Terrace. But to me, this sterile, wood-paneled room smelled like oxygen. I sat at the plaintiff's table. To my right sat Graham Halston, looking like a statue carved from granite in his dark suit. To his right sat Mr. Sterling, the attorney who had spent the last week dissecting the Mercer family's finances with the precision of a surgeon. Across the aisle, Wade and Celeste Mercer sat huddled with a court-appointed public defender. Their high-priced family lawyer had resigned 3 days ago when the check Wade wrote for the retainer bounced. They looked small. Without the backdrop of their mansion, without the lighting of a gala, without the chorus of sycophants they called friends, they were just two aging grifters caught in a trap of their own making. Tessa sat in the gallery behind them, wearing a hoodie and sunglasses, trying to look invisible. It was too late for that. The world had already seen her. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Judge Harrison entered. She was a woman in her 60s with eyes that had seen every variation of human greed imaginable. She took her seat and looked over the rims of her glasses at the defense table. "We are here for the emergency hearing regarding the assets of the Elena Halston Trust and the allegations of fraud regarding the promissory note," Judge Harrison said. "Mr. Sterling, you may proceed." My lawyer stood up. He didn't pace. He didn't shout. He simply laid out the timeline of my life as a series of financial transactions. "Your Honor," Mr. Sterling began. "For 30 years, the defendants, Wade and Celeste Mercer, acted not as parents, but as embezzlers. They received a monthly stipend equivalent to $6,500 in today's currency to provide for the plaintiff. Tiffany Reyes, instead, they placed those funds into a shell company and forced the plaintiff to live in near poverty, eventually attempting to extort her for a further $300,000. He walked to the evidence table. "We have submitted the bank records," Sterling continued. "We have the receipts provided by Mrs. Marlene Voss, which show a clear pattern of money laundering. We have the video evidence of the defendant, Wade Mercer, admitting to the extortion on a live stream. And finally, we have the testimony of Mrs. Naomi Keller." Wade flinched at the name. Naomi had turned state's witness 2 days ago. To save her own nursing license and avoid prison time, she had confessed to accepting bribes to keep my performance reviews artificially low, ensuring I stayed in a junior position so I wouldn't have the financial independence to leave the Mercer household. "This was a conspiracy," Sterling concluded. "A conspiracy to keep a woman trapped in childhood so they could rob her of her adulthood." Wade's public defender stood up. He looked tired. He knew he was fighting a forest fire with a water pistol. "Your Honor," the defender said weakly, "my clients dispute the characterization of events. They did raise Ms. Reyes. They provided a roof. They provided food. The promissory note was merely a misunderstanding regarding the terms of the trust. They believed they were entitled to back pay for their emotional labor." "Emotional labor?" Judge Harrison repeated, her eyebrows rising. "You are arguing that they charged their daughter interest for emotional labor?" "She is not their daughter," Sterling cut in sharp. "She was their cash cow." The judge turned to Wade. "Mr. Mercer, do you have anything to say?" Wade stood up. He smoothed his tie, trying to summon the arrogance that had served him so well for 3 decades. "We loved her," Wade lied, his voice trembling. "We treated her like our own, but she was difficult. She was ungrateful. We just wanted to ensure our own retirement after sacrificing so much." "Sacrifice?" I whispered. I hadn't meant to speak, but the word clawed its way out of my throat. Judge Harrison looked at me. "Ms. Reyes, do you wish to speak?" I stood up. I didn't need notes. "Your Honor," I said, "I paid for my own braces. I paid for my own car insurance. I paid rent to them starting the day I turned 18. They didn't sacrifice anything. They were paid $2 million to love me, and they embezzled every cent of it. They didn't just steal the money, they stole the memories. They made me believe I was a burden when I was actually their benefactor." I sat down. Wade refused to meet my eyes. "The court has seen enough evidence regarding the parents," Judge Harrison said, shuffling her papers. "However, there is a third party implicated in the conspiracy to defraud the trust." My heart skipped a beat. I looked at the defense table, expecting the judge to name Naomi Keller again. "Tessa Mercer," the judge said. "Please step forward." The entire courtroom froze. Tessa, who had been shrinking into her seat, looked up, her mouth open in shock. "Me?" she squeaked. I'm just an observer." "You are a signatory, Mr." Sterling said. Pulling a document from his briefcase, he walked over to Tessa, who was now standing by the railing, looking like a deer in headlights. "This is a witness attestation form," Sterling said, "dated 4 years ago. It validates the annual report sent to the trust administrators. It claims that Tiffany Reyes was suffering from reduced mental capacity and was unable to manage her own finances, thereby justifying the continued control of the assets by the guardians." I gasped. Reduced mental capacity? That was why they never wanted me to see the mail. That was why they treated me like a child. "I didn't read it," Tessa stammered, panic rising in her voice. "Daddy just told me to sign it. He said it was a tax thing for the house. He said if I didn't sign it, we would lose the pool." "You signed a legal document declaring your sister mentally incompetent so you could keep a swimming pool," Sterling said coldly. "That makes you a co-conspirator in insurance fraud and grand larceny." "No," Tessa screamed, turning on Wade. "You told me it was fine. You told me it was just paperwork. You didn't tell me I was committing a crime." "Shut up, Tessa," Wade roared, jumping to his feet. "I won't shut up," Tessa yelled back, her influencer facade cracking to reveal the terrified child beneath. "You ruined my life. I lost my sponsors. I am going to lose my studio. And now I am going to jail because you were too greedy to work?" "It wasn't just the pool," Celeste suddenly shouted. Standing up and pointing a shaking finger at Wade, she realized the ship was sinking, and she was scrambling for the only life raft left. "It was the offshore accounts. Wade has an account in the Caymans. He moved $500,000 there last year. I can give you the account numbers. I can give you the passwords. Just don't send me to prison." "Celeste!" Wade screamed, lunging at her. The bailiffs were on him in a second. They slammed Wade Mercer back into his chair. The courtroom erupted into chaos. The glorious, perfect Mercer family was tearing itself apart. Limb by limb, right in front of the bench, Judge Harrison banged her gavel. One sharp, decisive strike that silenced the room. "Enough," she commanded. She looked at the defendants with pure disdain. "It is the ruling of this court," Judge Harrison said, her voice ringing with finality, "that the promissory note is void ab initio. Invalid from the start, it was obtained under duress and founded on fraud." She turned a page. "Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order against Wade and Celeste Mercer regarding Ms. Reyes. You are to have no contact with her. None." She looked at Graham. "The court recognizes Mr. Graham Halston as the executor of the transition. The Elena Halston Trust is hereby fully vested in Tiffany Reyes, effective immediately. Additionally, under the fraudulent concealment clause of the trust, the penalty of treble damages is invoked." She looked at Wade and Celeste, who were now sobbing quietly. "You misappropriated approximately $2 million. You now owe the trust $6 million. The court orders the immediate seizure of all assets held by the defendants, including the primary residence, the vacation vehicles, and the investment accounts, to satisfy this judgment. The investigation into Ms. Tessa Mercer's involvement will be referred to the district attorney." The gavel came down one last time. "Case closed." It was over. I watched as the bailiffs escorted Wade and Celeste out. They didn't look at me. They were too busy arguing with each other about who was to blame. Tessa was led out separately, weeping into her hands, her sunglasses askew. I stood up. My legs felt light, like gravity had suddenly released its hold on me. "You did it," Graham said softly, standing beside me. "We did it," I corrected. We walked out of the courtroom and into the bright, harsh hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 30 years, the air didn't feel like it was borrowed. It was mine. Graham stopped near a bench. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet bag. "There is one last thing," he said. He handed it to me. I opened the bag. Inside was a small, silver flash drive. What is this? I asked. Elena didn't write a second letter, Graham said. She recorded a message. She knew paper could be burned. She hid this in a safety deposit box that only opened when the trust transferred. We walked out of the courthouse to his car. I sat in the passenger seat and plugged the drive into the dashboard system. A voice filled the car. It was warm, slightly raspy, and sounded so much like my own laugh that I covered my mouth to stifle a sob. Hello, my sweet girl. If you are hearing this, you made it. You are 30. You are a woman grown. I know you must be angry that I locked the money away until now. I know you must have struggled, and I am sorry. But I saw the way Wade and Celeste looked at money. I knew that if you had access to it at 18 or 21, they would have manipulated you into giving it to them. They would have guilted you. They would have bled you dry before you even knew how to say no. I needed you to be strong first. I needed you to know who you were without the money, so that when you finally got it, you would have the power to keep it. The money isn't the gift. Tiffany, the struggle was the lesson. The freedom is the gift. Be happy, be free, and know that I loved you with every breath I had. The recording clicked off. I sat there for a long time, watching the city traffic move past the window. My mother hadn't abandoned me. She had been playing a 30-year game of chess to save me. And she had won. I wiped my eyes and opened the car door. Where are you going? Graham asked. To say goodbye? I said. I walked over to the sidewalk where Wade, Celeste, and Tessa were standing, waiting for a taxi because their luxury SUVs had already been tagged for seizure. They looked like refugees from a life they had never really earned. They saw me coming. Wade straightened up, a flicker of his old aggression returning. You happy now? Wade spat. You ruined us. You left your family on the street. I don't have a family standing here, I said calmly. I see 3 people who I used to work for. I looked at Celeste. I hope the money was worth it. Celeste, because it cost you your daughter. Then I turned to Tessa. She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. Tiffany, she whimpered, I have nowhere to go. My friends blocked me. The studio is gone. Can I stay with you? Just for a few weeks? Until I get back on my feet? I looked at her. I remembered the years she watched me scrub the floors while she filmed makeup tutorials. I remembered the way she signed that paper declaring me incompetent so she could keep a pool. No, I said. Tessa's face crumbled. But I'm your sister. You were my sister when it was convenient, I said. Now you are an adult. You can live the truth, Tessa. Or you can live with the consequences, but you won't be living with me. I turned my back on them. I heard Wade shouting something about ungratefulness, but his voice sounded like it was coming from a radio tuned to a dead station. It was just static. I walked back to Graham. He was leaning against the car, smiling. Ready to go home? He asked. Not yet, I said. Let's go look at condos. I have a down payment to make, and this time, I'm paying cash. Graham laughed. You don't need to buy a condo, Tiffany. You own the Mercer estate. Sell it, I said without hesitation. Burn it down. I don't care. I don't want their ghosts. I want something new, something mine. Done, Graham said. He opened the door for me. So, he said, pausing, what do we do now? Do we start making up for lost time? Do you want me to be Dad? I looked at this man who had fought for me, who had waited in the shadows for 12 years, because he thought my happiness was more important than his presence. You don't need a title. Graham, I said, echoing the words he had said to me in the diner. I don't need a father to save me anymore. I just need someone who won't leave me alone in the room. I can do that, he said. I'm not going anywhere. Good, I said. I stepped into the car. The sun was breaking through the clouds, hitting the windshield with a blinding, beautiful light. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that finally, truly belonged to me. I wasn't the daughter who owed a debt. I wasn't the nurse who needed a reference. I was Tiffany Reyes, and for the first time in 30 years, my life was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below with your city or country so we can see how far Tiffany's journey has traveled. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please make sure to subscribe to the Jane Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people who need to hear it.